She was the love of my life, or so I thought. We stood side by side, our hands barely touching, the quiet before the storm. In the darkness of our missions, her beauty was a beacon, but it masked a betrayal I never saw coming. Every mission, every secret exchange brought us closer to the truth I couldn't escape. The confrontation was inevitable, her fierce determination, my growing suspicion. When I found that hidden document, the evidence of her deceit, the world I knew shattered. And in the rain-soaked street as we faced each other for the last time, the woman I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger with the same piercing blue eyes. She had the brightest blue eyes I had ever seen. They were a clear, pale blue, even in the dim light. As I held her down on the rough ground, her dark, curly hair spread out around her. Her clothes were a bit messy from our struggle, but she fought back with surprising strength. Instead of calling for help, she bit my arm, making me pull away in pain. I managed to break free, but quickly grabbed her wrist again. When she tried to bite me again, I reacted sharply, causing her lip to bleed, mixing her blood with mine. I had startled her in the dark of the empty lot, lit only by a distant streetlight. I quickly took her purse from her, throwing it aside to remove any threats, and tried to overpower her. Even though she was small, she was fit and strong. For a moment, our eyes met, and I noticed a change in her expression. Then everything took a turn. She bit at my arm again, and when I moved back, she kneed me in the hip, throwing me off balance. I tried to regain my footing, but she was fast. Her knee hit me hard, sending sharp pain through my body. I felt her slip from my grip as I struggled to get back up. Even while I tried to rise, I felt several strong kicks to my side, which hurt badly. It was amazing how much power she had for someone so small. I rolled myself away from her third kick, and in response, I swept my legs hard, knocking her down. I heard her hit the ground as I stood up. However, she was quickly back on her feet, ready to fight again. That explained the strength in her kicks. I dropped into a lower fighting stance. She was sweating and breathing heavily, so I moved to her weak side, looking for a better way to attack. Suddenly, a loud alarm went off, startling both of us. I straightened up and kept my hands at my sides, making sure she did the same, which she did, watching me closely. Lights! The area brightened as the instructor, with gray hair tied back, walked towards us from the side. I could see other students watching from a distance, coming closer from their observation area. The training space was covered in asphalt and gravel, about the size of a basketball court, with cars parked along one side. "Agent," the instructor said, directing his attention to her while keeping an eye on me. "I know he has more weight, but when you throw him off, you need to stay close and keep your hip against his." Gaining control from a stronger opponent is the goal of that move. You learned that a strong hit may not stop someone if they can handle the pain. It would have been smarter to run away when facing someone much bigger and stronger. But you did well. "Sergeant." I turned slightly to him, still keeping an eye on her. "Good first attack, and rolling after your fall was smart. But you should have done the sweep right away. That would have made things easier for you. Good job. Exercise over. Training finished." As he said this, green lights flashed, and we both relaxed. He walked back to the other students. The men were staring while the women looked at me in shock and disapproval. The agent stumbled a bit as she tried to move. She nearly fell, but managed to steady herself. I took off my sweaty t-shirt and offered it to her. She nodded and took it, letting her torn shirt fall to the ground before putting mine on. It was a bit big on her, but adjusted nicely. I gave it to her more to help with the cold than for any other reason, especially after going through tough training. "Infirmary?" I asked. She nodded, wiping her lips on the shirt. "I can't walk. I don't think anything is broken, but my foot can't hold me for a bit." "Your foot?" "Yeah, probably just bruised. Luckily, it's my last day. I can carry you if we lean your weight on my right side. I could use support, too." She nodded again. Here, saying thank you was not usual. We weren't encouraged to get too comfortable with each other. I knew she was a federal officer of some sort, maybe from the BATF, FBI, or DEA, since she was called Agent. She knew I was with military intelligence because I was called Sergeant. Here, names didn't matter. The other female students watched in surprise as she allowed me to pick her up gently, resting an arm around my neck. They didn't get it. They weren't field workers, just learning about our training. Where was here? That's a complicated question. Let's just say it was somewhere east of the Mississippi. It didn't really have a proper name, just a changing code. In the playful spirit of spies, it had a few nicknames: St. Tristan's Academy for Wayward Girls and Wicked Boys, Mistress Dominique's Place of Tough Lessons, and most commonly, Anti-Social Behavior 101. The training program included various classes meant to teach skills not found in a typical college course. Each student received lessons based on their specific missions. Here are some of the classes I knew about. Unarmed Combat, Small Group Unarmed Combat. I didn't attend this since I was deployed alone. Counter-surveillance, defensive and offensive driving, improvised weapons, outdoor survival covers and legends, counter-interrogation, technical surveillance. We had just completed the final exercise for an important training course for female operatives. Safety is a major concern for many women working undercover, and this class aimed to prepare them. For the last scenario, male students who excelled in unarmed combat were chosen to act as aggressors. We received detailed instructions and some practice to ensure the exercise felt realistic and intimidating. Female students were paired with male counterparts based on their profiles to increase the intensity of the exercise. There are usually only a few female operatives training at once, making it easy for them to report to the admin office from where they finished a practice exercise in a simulation of a restaurant. The best route was through a darkened training room. After months of training, they were somewhat prepared, but they had no warning about this last exercise. They only knew something was about to happen when a flashing red light and an alarm signaled the start of the scenario. Their bright uniforms were meant to make them feel vulnerable, indicating to instructors that the exercise had begun. This was our last task in the final class. The male students would leave later that night, and the female students would depart the next day after a complete review of what they had learned. As I walked her down the hall, we remained silent. This was normal here. The infirmary was located on the same floor as the training area, which made sense given how often injuries occurred. There were no mats on the floor, and while the training tools were safe, they could still be painful. The environment was designed to ensure we took the training seriously. The few staff members we passed didn't pay us much attention. Odd outfits and injuries were common in this place. Upon entering the infirmary, the nurse guided me to room 3, so I carefully brought her inside and helped her onto the exam table. She winced slightly as she settled in. I then took a seat in a nearby chair. Somewhere nearby, I could hear quiet crying through the walls. She listened for a moment, her blue eyes moving around the room. "Someone didn't make it," she said softly. I nodded. "It seems that way." There was a long pause before she asked, still not looking up, "What was up with the awkwardness before?" I sighed, glad she didn't push too hard. 6.5 months without much contact with anyone. It's been tough. "I understand, but why only at the end? Someone might take that the wrong way." I laughed lightly. "I'm not into anything that's not agreed upon. It doesn't appeal to me. But when you smiled, maybe thinking about how to take charge, I realized you knew it wasn't real." She actually smiled back. "I felt more relaxed when I looked at your arm. That's when I realized we were just practicing. When I smiled, it was because I thought if I stopped fighting, maybe we could find something deeper. I wonder how the teachers would have responded to that. They probably would have pointed out what we could improve." She chuckled. "I can hear it now. Agent, you need to be stronger in your approach, and your positioning could be better." She covered her face and tried to hold in her laughter, but it spilled out anyway, and I struggled not to join her. Then she looked at me, her eyes sparkling with laughter. "Can you picture the new students?" At that moment, we both lost it, laughing until we had to pause to catch our breaths. Before we could talk more, a busy doctor came in to check on her. He gave her crutches and wrapped my ribs to help with the pain. As usual, he skipped the strong pain medicine, just giving us some anti-inflammatories. Once we got to the main hall and were heading in different directions, she looked at me and smiled. I watched her walk away and remembered the warmth I felt from her during the exercise and against my arm while I helped her to the infirmary. It struck me later that she still had my t-shirt. 2 years later, The division chief, Donna, called me in from a well-deserved break and told me to come to the office right away. So I headed in, a bit unkempt, wearing sandals, shorts, and a Joe's Crab Shack t-shirt. When I walked past her secretary and into the conference room, I noticed two well-dressed people sitting at her table, looking at me with curiosity. Ignoring them, I turned to Donna. "What's with the visitors? Please tell me this isn't about the FBI." She glanced at the two who were clearly judging me. "Long-term surveillance is going to be on us. This is ordered by the director. We need to work together. They need our language and technology skills." I rubbed my nose and closed my eyes for a moment. "Donna, no matter what I think about this, just look at them. They look like they have FBI written all over them. Anyone with a small issue is probably avoiding this place right now. There's no way a secret operation with these two will succeed." The woman was glaring at me while the man tried to stay calm. Donna looked at me with frustration. She had to have seen this coming. Finally, the female agent spoke. "What's your problem?" I lifted my shirt slightly to show the scars on my side. "The last time I worked with your team, one of your agents got 3 people hurt, including himself. I used his firearm to handle things, but then your agency wanted to blame me for not doing what I was told. I wasn't supposed to have a weapon, so when he got into trouble, they wanted me to just let things happen. If he had waited like I suggested, local authorities could have helped, and we would have avoided problems. But he didn't want to share the credit." She hesitated, looking at her partner. To him, she said, "I knew that report didn't add up." Turning back to me, she added, "I'm not going undercover. Executive assistant directors don't usually do that. Just so you know, I stopped the intent to prosecute. The report felt wrong. Look, we brought an agent who is just as worried about using untested resources as you are about working with us. If you both don't want to continue, we'll see what else we can do." I kept quiet and nodded instead of responding. An executive assistant director at the FBI was someone I couldn't easily dismiss. Donna seemed a bit too happy about all this. We'd need to talk later. Just then, the door opened behind me and a woman's voice began. "Ma'am, the technology looks good. If they just train me on the equipment we don't need." As I turned, the voice trailed off, and she stood there staring at me, wide-eyed and silent. I was equally at a loss, caught in the depth of her blue eyes. She spoke first. "Sergeant?" "Agent." I could feel the confusion from Donna and the other agents. Things were about to get even more complicated. "I still have your shirt. Are you better now?" Her eyes sparkled with humor. "Oh, yes, I'm fine. How about you?" "As good as ever." "You can keep the shirt. I never went to Rutgers." She smiled. "I was planning to keep it anyway. It's my favorite sleep shirt. The stains never really came out. I forgot to wash it in cold water, so they set in." Donna raised an eyebrow at me, curious. "A friend of yours?" "Just an old school friend from St. Tristan's." The agent smiled playfully. "We had a short but intense history. I joked. I couldn't walk for a month. I was ready to join in on the fun. She broke my heart and my ribs." Her supervisors looked confused and a bit uneasy. The agent saw their reaction and decided to explain. "We were rivals in a special training course for undercover agents a few years ago." The man still looked confused, but the woman nodded like she understood. "That course is known for being very challenging." The dark-haired agent continued, explaining the training, but her words felt more formal and detached compared to my vivid memories. Donna appeared worried. "I'm not sure how this will work. I trained there too, and it's been nearly 10 years since then. I'm not sure about working with my old rival." The agent reassured her with a smile. "I'll be fine. It was tough, but it was just training and he was following the rules." Donna seemed impressed. Then she looked at me. "So are you okay with this?" I nodded, glancing at the agent. "As long as we can work out the details, I'm good to team up with her. We have similar training and she stays calm under pressure." Emma, that was her name, and she was very smart. She had done a lot of the planning for our operation, and it was different from the usual plans made by federal agencies. Instead of using hidden surveillance vans, we decided to rent a house and work in the area. Emma had even gotten her LPN license and kept it up to date, so the FBI could use fake documents in another name without getting into trouble. With her part-time job at a low-cost women's health clinic and me working as a substitute teacher in nearby high schools, we had a good balance in our schedules to monitor our target. We could blend in easily. Emma and I created a cover story. We would pretend to be a couple who had been apart for 6 months because I was teaching abroad for a scholarship. Our target was a Romanian neighborhood where the FBI had received several tips about illegal items being sent to drug cartels and, more importantly, to terrorist groups in the U.S. This mattered to me because the rules about fighting terrorism allowed me to help the FBI as a language expert. Many tips pointed to the same neighborhood, but they didn't mention specific people. The request for a court order must have been strong, giving us almost complete freedom for our watch based on the state's urgent need. We had a range of tools for listening in, including cell phone intercept equipment, special microphones, and various gadgets that looked like everyday objects. For the next 4 hours, we eagerly reviewed our plan, paying close attention to every detail. Donna and her supervisors let us focus, knowing we had it under control. Emma was particularly sharp, and we only needed to make some small changes, which was lucky since we had just 2 weeks until we began our operation. Because our presence would be noticeable in the tight-knit immigrant community, we decided to make extra noise to blend in. The Friday before our move, I strolled through the area, leaving notes on doors to apologize for any trouble caused by a rented moving van. When we arrived, our car would have a message that looked like "just married" to add to the scene. We arranged for some colleagues from our teams to help us move in, while they actually set up equipment in the basement and attic. Meanwhile, Emma would be at her cover job at the clinic. Every part of the plan worked well, and the operation was a success. Due to rules, many details will stay private for a long time. I can share that 6 people with bad intentions faced the consequences of their actions. As for Emma and me, we enjoyed 6 months of a fulfilling relationship. We connected right away. She was charming, smart, and supportive. We embraced our mutual feelings, which were clear from the beginning. At first, I thought we were simply infatuated, but by the 4th month, I knew it had grown into love. We shared stories about our childhoods and past jobs. I told her about my time in a Buddhist monastery, focusing on roots while trying to stay alert during meditation. Emma shared her surprising experiences as an undercover art dealer. I brought her flowers, we had picnics, and we enjoyed barbecues with our neighbors. We even helped watch their children sometimes. I could see Emma as a wonderful mom one day. Everything felt real and promising. However, there was a challenge beneath it all. Emma's ambition was strong. She wanted to succeed on her own terms, without anything holding her back. Her family had considerable wealth, much more than most people could imagine. She had grown up in fancy boarding schools in Switzerland, where her childhood felt like endless training to become the successful lawyer her parents wanted to protect their business interests. She hated it. Every moment in boarding and prep school was tough for her, and even though she did well in law, she felt the same dislike for that path. When she finished school, instead of going to work for her father's companies, she decided to apply to the FBI. She was determined to create her own path. Her parents were very upset, shouted, and even said they didn't want anything to do with her. In the end, her strong desire to succeed took over. We both had feelings for each other, but she couldn't give up on her dream. She had worked too hard for it. She kindly told me that we both needed to focus on our careers, and that it was best to keep our distance. We didn't want to lose sight of our important work. It was a difficult choice, one that made us both sad. Our last month together was filled with sweet moments, knowing it was our last time. She would hold me tightly each night, but in the end she thought it was best to part ways. The mission wrapped up quietly, as good missions usually do, with gentle knocks instead of loud arguments. A quick meeting or two, and that was it. Then came the sadness. I didn't see her again for 6 years. I was just finishing my daily report when the phone rang. She seemed to expect me to know who she was right away. All she said was, "We need to meet at Walter Reed Hospital, in the entrance lobby, as soon as you can get there." Then she hung up. I quickly searched for more details and rushed out, telling my secretary I had an urgent matter. When I left the military for civilian life, I had taken over Donna's role along with her secretary. Donna had also moved up in her career. I still worked for her, but my role had changed. I found her standing in the busy lobby, still standing tall, but now her hair had some gray in it. It looked good on her. Her professional outfit showed she was important, and the bodyguard beside her indicated her high position. He was watching closely as I approached her. I kept my hands in sight and nodded as I got closer. Deputy Director. She gave a small smile, a bit more polite than when we first met. I might take some time, but I do learn. She paused, and a look of concern crossed her face. Emma. Emma was involved in an incident last month in Turkey. My heart raced. She will recover. She is in a special care situation while they help her heal. She lost part of her leg and hand, and she will need surgery on her face. She will survive, but I'm sure she mentioned more details. She might have talked for a while, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I could only think of Emma's beautiful blue eyes. She was hiding behind a colorful skirt, her dark curls tied with a pink ribbon. I understood the feeling of being drawn in. I didn't think I just stepped closer and knelt down. I wasn't sure if my knees would hold me up much longer. Someone started to say something, but we couldn't hear it. Our eyes were locked in surprise. I understood. She understood. She spoke first. Where have you been? Chasing the bad guys. But I'm done now. They won't let me see Mommy. That's because they don't know how strong you are, sweetheart. She reached out to hold my hand. The girl in the colorful skirt watched us, looking worried. I stood up. Where's Emma's room? Riding the elevator to Emma's floor was an adventure. Ellie. Her name was Ellie, and she was amazing. 5 years old, she loved gymnastics, horses, and mango smoothies. Everyone else had gone quiet. By the time we reached the top floor, Ellie and I were like best friends. Even the girl in the colorful skirt seemed to notice. I picked her up and went straight to Emma's room. A nurse tried to stop us, but a bodyguard waved her away. I felt Ellie tense as we entered. Emma looked unwell. Bandages covered part of her face, and her arms and legs were wrapped up. IV bags, oxygen, and several machines crowded around her bed. I lifted Ellie to lie against Emma's side. Mommy's resting, but I think she could use a long hug. Ellie smiled and cuddled up to Emma. I turned back to the deputy director. Why now? She paused for a moment. Kathy and Monica's power of attorney ends next week. Emma's parents want custody. Emma would hate that. And with that kind of money, only the biological father would likely win, right? She nodded. I usually don't explain myself to anyone except Congress, but she trusted me with this. Leaving you hurt her more than she would ever admit, but I could see it. She wanted to do the right thing. The right thing, I thought, would have been to marry me and be happy together. But this wasn't the time to argue that. She continued, It might be a struggle. Emma's father is using his resources to create trouble. Kathy and Monica were refused at the last moment when they tried to renew their apartment lease, so they have to move out next week. Monica's bakery has had 4 inspectors from different agencies this week. I'm going to stop that, but he won't wait long to go after her suppliers. Rainbow skirt and suit. I guess they were Monica and Kathy, looked at me. I decided to speak to them. I know you don't trust me, I said, raising a hand to stop any argument, and why should you? You don't know me. So here's what I can offer. I have a farm down the Green Line, and my house is big enough for everyone. It's an old farmhouse with 6 bedrooms, not counting the basement. You can stay rent-free until Emma wakes up or you choose to leave. Monica stayed quiet, but Kathy, with a serious expression, replied, Deal. We need to look after Ellie. We promised Emma we would. Our choices are limited. I couldn't help but smile when I realized that Kathy had worked with Emma in the art studio. She looked at me cautiously, but I chose not to bring it up. After all, Monica might not know, and I didn't want to create more problems. I told them where the farm was and wrote down some directions. Kathy said they would come by after getting some clothes from home. Their apartment lost power last night, and they couldn't find anyone to fix it. Monica gave me a serious look. Don't get any wrong ideas. We're just here for Ellie. I have more important things to focus on right now, I replied. I went back inside to find Ellie sitting up and waiting patiently. She was gently touching Emma's face while the nurse watched with concern. Are we going to live with you now? She asked. I smiled. Little rabbits have long ears. She beamed back at me. I took out my phone and showed her a picture. I could use your help with Frankie. She leaned over to see the picture. He's so cute. Is he a pug? Yes, he's a goofy little guy and could use a friend. She laughed. By the time they arrived, it was almost 9 p.m. The 2 women walked in slowly, looking around, but Ellie dashed past them, eager to see me and Frankie. It was love at first sight. In no time, they were playing happily on the floor. Kathy and Monica relaxed a bit as I showed them around the house, a big old place built just after the Civil War. I inherited it and 72 acres from my grandfather because of my interest in history, while my siblings received other land. I sold 30 acres to help restore the house to its former beauty. I made subtle updates that kept its historical charm. We chose a room for Ellie next to mine, while Kathy and Monica's room would be on the other side. There were many changes ahead. Ellie had to get used to wearing jeans and shirts instead of dresses. Kathy and especially Monica needed to learn to trust me, a trust that took time to build. I think Monica started to trust me when Ellie got sick, and I stayed up all night helping her feel better. A few days later, while I was reading in the library after Ellie had gone to bed, Kathy and Monica walked in wearing comfortable sleep clothes with cheerful designs. It was a nice gesture of trust, even though it never happened again. We settled into a routine. Every night, either Kathy, Monica, or I would stay for a few hours with Emma, listening to the machines. On Saturdays, Ellie would spend a few hours with her. Nearly a month after Ellie moved in, the court date for custody arrived. Kathy and Monica walked ahead while I stayed back with Emma's boss. I then noticed Emma's parents, a man in a nice suit and a woman in elegant clothes. They looked well off and powerful. It's no wonder Emma had said she was surprised they had a child together. They didn't seem very close. When their lawyer finished talking, I was signaled to step forward. Emma's father looked surprised to see me. His team should have known about my connection with Kathy, Monica, and Ellie. At the judge's request, I shared the DNA reports and explained how Emma had been protecting my job, keeping me unaware of Ellie's situation. Their lawyer quickly asked, "Does your work pose a risk to the child?" I replied, "No, I'm not involved in risky work anymore. There will be no safety or stability problems." The deputy director confirmed what I said. I added that Kathy and Monica were ready to help me until Emma improved. The judge's decision felt certain. Emma's father looked cold, while her mother's eyes reflected a deeper sadness. Once the judge left, Emma's father walked out, followed closely by a group of aides and lawyers. Emma's mother stood there in shock, a driver waiting next to her. I went up to her. "You can visit on Sundays. It's a farm, so wear something comfortable. Please call ahead." She looked at me with appreciation, tears in her eyes. Thank you. I tried to raise Emma like I was raised, but she was so different. I knew I had made mistakes with Emma, but I never realized how much she felt unhappy, until it was too late to change things. I want to be part of my granddaughter's life, even in a small way. I gave her driver my address and phone number. The next Sunday she came by after calling and continued to visit every Saturday after that. Her name was Evelyn, and she was wonderful. She wore jeans and boots, looking casual yet stylish, showing up every Sunday without fail. Ellie took her on horse rides, for picnics, and they built bonfires together. Evelyn and her husband were together for reasons beyond love. They had come together to create a legacy. On their wedding day, the stock market jumped 253 points. They lived mostly separate lives, and much to her husband's disappointment, Emma became their only child due to health issues. After facing difficulties in their relationship, Evelyn's chances of having another child faded. Divorce was not an option for them. It would have caused too much trouble with money. Evelyn had homes in France, Portugal, and New York, but she understood what she had lost with Emma and wanted to repair things. She added an apartment in Falls Church and took a strong stand to stop any more legal issues with Emma's father. She made it clear that if he pushed the matter, she would reconsider their partnership. This was a relief, because I wanted to keep things simple. It took another 3 months before Emma was fully awake. When she finally opened her eyes, we were there, with Ellie sitting on the edge of the bed and me in the corner of the room. Without saying a word, she pulled Ellie close and held her tightly, tears streaming down her face. I stayed back while she hugged Kathy and Monica, giving them a moment to share their feelings. Her bright blue eyes found me, widening in surprise. Her mouth made a small "oh." "Finally," she said, "I'm so sorry." Kathy and Monica took Ellie out of the room, leaving us alone. "Sorry for what?" I asked softly. "For not telling you I was expecting, for not letting you know about Ellie." "I understand. You were honest about how you felt about our work. You were trying to protect both me and Ellie. That doesn't mean it didn't hurt. or that I'm happy to have missed her early years. She seemed unsure what to say, and a quietness filled the room. She started again, hesitantly. I kept having dreams about you. I smiled and sat on the edge of the bed beside her. I was here reading to you about 3 days a week for the last few months. I took her hand gently. She smiled softly, almost shyly. I missed you so much. I should have. I don't know how to make it up to you. I shook my head gently. We'll have plenty of time to figure things out. Ellie will be happy to have you back home. She looked confused, so I explained about Kathy and Monica moving to the house with Ellie. Her expression changed as I told her about their lease situation and Evelyn's visits. It didn't take much to convince her to move to the farmhouse, especially with Kathy, Monica, Ellie, and me united. Even Frankie joined us to help, which led to a funny chase through the halls that almost got me in trouble at the hospital. Thankfully, Evelyn's status as a primary supporter helped protect us. It took a month of therapy before she could come home with us, and 4 months later she moved into my room, something Ellie eagerly supported. And we were still us. The bond we shared was strong. The challenges Emma faced didn't matter to me, which made her journey a bit easier. She had stepped back from secret work because of Ellie, realizing that field work was no longer safe for her. Instead, she started working in management and eventually rose to a higher position. For Emma, the hardest part was learning to trust Evelyn. It took 4 years and 2 more kids before she felt completely at ease. We ended up with 2 extra houses on the property, Kathy and Monica's house and Evelyn's. Evelyn stopped wearing fancy branded clothes and now prefers comfortable jeans. Still, she has a great eye for stylish boots. The moment I met Ellie's first child, our grandchild, was unforgettable. Her name is Elisa, and she's amazing. She has the brightest blue eyes I've ever seen. They were the coldest blue eyes I'd ever encountered, almost clear, like the icy heart of a glacier. They sparkled with quiet anger as she faced her opponent. I felt a chill in my heart as her voice sliced through the air with sharpness. There was no hint of warmth or kindness in her tone. She couldn't even see me as I stood back in the dark hall. Not that she really ever noticed me. I was almost invisible to her most days. Since I spent so much time away at boarding school and events with other well-off families, I wasn't sure she would even know who I was if we met on the street. Not that she would ever choose to simply walk down the street. Her opponent stood still, as if the words she threw at him didn't matter at all. There wouldn't be any children, no new additions to the family name. I was meant to carry the Reinhardt name by myself. Father blinked, showing the only movement in his stillness. Fine, she'll do. That was about as emotional as I'd ever seen Father get, a glimpse of his frustration. And that was what was expected of me. I had been raised to be the heir of the greatest business deal ever made. The Reinhardt family had united with the respected family known as the Shining Daughter of New York. The Reinhardt name held a sense of history. The leader of the Reinhardt merchant family was often called just by their last name. This old way of doing things continued as the merchants evolved into bankers and then investors. The family business had grown so vast that no one really knew where it began or if it ever really ended. From the day I was born, my life was planned out for me. Private schools, tutors, and top boarding schools in Europe shaped my education. I learned about math, economics, and statistics from a young age. I began physical training when I was 5, learning self-discipline and quick thinking, getting ready for the less obvious but still tough challenges of the business world. From the start, my life and education were set up to prepare me for a career in corporate law. In this environment, money experts and economists could be easily influenced. Lawyers could be tricky, a bad one could ruin you, while a good one could be too pushy. The Reinhardt heir was set to study law to manage everything legal. My path was laid out for me from my early days, and I didn't like it. I wasn't sure what I wanted, but it wasn't this. I had a life filled with privileges and power, yet it felt empty. With so many staff coming and going, I felt overlooked by my mother. I learned what a mother should be like from others, and I realized she didn't fit that mold. I rarely saw my father. He was always too busy for his only child. I got the feeling he wanted a son, but after facing issues from one of his affairs, that hope was gone. My mother didn't really care. She had her own interests. His carelessness made her even more indifferent. I saw how money could harm people. It ruined connections and trust. Love felt impossible. At 13, standing outside my father's office, I learned my hope of escaping my future was gone. I rebelled in little ways. I dated a Norwegian ski instructor, but the next day I found a pack of birth control pills in my bathroom, and I never saw him again. Every small act of rebellion was met with indifference. Prep school led to college, then to law school, all planned by them. I did well because of my upbringing. I worked hard and excelled in my studies. But deep down, I was still searching for an escape. In law school, I met a guy who was funny and smart. I shared my thoughts about my future, and he seemed to understand. He wondered if I could make my life meaningful, despite everything. He sounded so genuine. Then I learned he was connected to my family. I never knew if he was sent by them or if he changed sides after we got close. That was when I realized I couldn't trust anyone. Anyone could be working for them, and even someone with good intentions could lose their integrity to money, just like everyone else. So I worked harder to improve my skills. I became the best at pretending to accept my fate. I went along with the plan, trying to find a way out, a place where their money didn't mean much. After I finished law school, I told them I needed to pass the bar exam in New York, where finance was big, and that it might take me a while to be ready for the job they had set aside for me. I passed the bar on my first attempt, just as I expected. They didn't seem rushed and didn't suspect anything. I got my own apartment and started living by myself. I quickly realized I didn't know much about taking care of myself. I ruined many clothes while learning to do laundry, and I even lost weight in my first month because I struggled with cooking. To keep myself busy while I looked for a way out, I found a flyer for LPN classes. Just like everything else, I was good at it. It was a great way to meet regular people and learn to be more like them. I discovered I actually enjoyed it. I was finishing my last hands-on training at various hospitals when I found my way out. There was a serious situation downtown that led to many injuries. Most of those hurt were gang members, but one was an FBI special agent who came to our hospital. In a way, I was looking for a chance and found the FBI. I immediately filled out an application and waited for it to be processed. I never thought they would turn me down. I had always succeeded at everything. I pushed myself to prepare for the fitness tests and took lessons at shooting ranges with different types of guns. One instructor I hired with help from the Reinhardts was a retired FBI agent, and another was a former Special Forces member. By the time my academy class started, I felt ready. My classmates were typical high achievers, full of energy. They were standouts in their activities, sports stars, and a few from the debate team. It was challenging at first. We didn't get along smoothly. I tried hard to fit in. Things took a turn on the third day when I heard whispers of rich girl and felt left out. They must have thought I would feel lonely and quit. They didn't really know what loneliness was. I had spent my childhood feeling alone in a way they couldn't understand, and that feeling stuck with me for weeks. However, their attitude changed after our first practice match in the 4th week. The instructor had noticed how skilled I was. I may be small, standing at 5'3", but when it came time for our match, he paired me with the biggest guy in the class. That match lasted only 23 seconds. My second match lasted almost a full minute. By the next day, everyone had given me a new nickname, Danger Mouse. I finally gained their respect. I felt like part of the team, even if I wasn't completely accepted. It was the best feeling I'd ever had. For 6 weeks, I had been part of something bigger. At graduation, I learned that my plan had backfired. A hand-carved rosewood box was sent to my room. Inside was a bottle of 1928 Krug champagne. I guessed that had to be from Evelyn, only to keep up appearances. Mr. Reinhardt had never given a gift in his life. I returned home to face the music before heading off to California. The meeting was uncomfortable. Mr. Reinhardt was silently angry, and Evelyn was cold, and I was left with a big headache from my last outing and an empty bottle in my luggage. To keep it short, after a 15-minute talk, I was no longer part of the family. I left the study without saying a word, gathered my bags, and walked out. Any dreams I had of becoming a special agent faded quickly. At first, it was just a lot of paperwork and meetings, but it felt more real that way. I was good at filling out forms, making plans, and putting things together. It took several months before I was involved in any real cases beyond the simple ones given to junior agents. It was mainly due to blind luck and my poor cooking skills. I got word that someone related to my case was being picked up. I had a time and an address, so I headed out. An interesting thing about case numbers is that one wrong digit can cause big problems. The wrong agents can end up at the wrong places. When I arrived and saw the hostage rescue team van parked quietly in a neighborhood that didn't match the harmless embezzler I was building a case against, I put on my apologetic junior agent face and went to tell them the bad news. Inside the van, serious agents in tactical gear were focused on maps and discussing plans. The scene felt intense, like wolves preparing for a hunt. I often spent my evenings learning about these things on the Discovery Channel. I looked around for anyone I recognized. Nobody. I waited quietly, expecting someone to ask me what I was doing so I could break the news. Finally, a bald man in the middle of the action looked at me sharply. "Who are you?" I started to explain, but he cut me off, clearly annoyed. "Does your mom know you're here, and does she know you had to cross the street to get here?" Laughter filled the van, but I noticed an older agent with a steel-gray crew cut watching me closely. He seemed eager to see how I would respond. The Reinhardt side of me kicked in. "Yes, she sent me to remind you to take it easy and stay out of trouble." The bald man looked even more frustrated, but before he could reply, the man with the gray crew cut spoke up. "Wait a minute." The bald man turned to him. "Mike?" Crew cut looked at me. "Turn around." His tone made me feel I should listen without questioning it. "What do you weigh?" he asked. 115, I replied. "Maybe on a good day. Your clothes look loose. You probably weigh about 105 right now." That sounded right. My cooking skills weren't great, and I had been living on salads since I often messed up other meals. I nodded. He studied me closely. "You could easily get through that small opening. We could take the best option." Whatever that meant, Dave seemed unsure. "She's not with HRT. If things go south, it'll be trouble with the director." Mike replied with a serious smile. "Nothing will go wrong. This is Danger Mouse. Jorge at the academy told me about her. She's an amazing agent for her size. I stood a little taller. Whatever was happening, I wanted in. That's me." Everyone agreed. No one wanted to argue with Mike. The target was a known criminal accused of kidnapping a 2-year-old girl from a nearby park. He had been chatting online with someone in Britain, claiming he had her hidden somewhere. He had also said that he would harm her if anyone tried to rescue her. The only way into the basement from outside was through a tiny window that used to be a coal chute. The plan was to have an agent in the basement to protect the girl while the team came in through the front door, but the window was far too small for most adults. Except for me, a smaller agent. Before I knew it, I was squeezing through the little opening and dropping into the dark basement, armed only with a small flashlight. Mike was sure that my usual bureau sidearm wouldn't be powerful enough for this job, so he had me take a compact weapon instead. With my chosen gear, I searched the darkness. It smelled musty, like old stone and dust. Even with the flashlight, the darkness felt heavy. I found her in the corner, huddled under a blanket. I wanted to comfort her and show her she was safe. I gently turned her to face me, carefully positioning the flashlight. She had the coldest blue eyes I'd ever seen, pale and almost white. Her head was tilted strangely, and there was something pressing against her neck. I don't know how long I stayed there, just staring. The official report has its timeline, but in that moment everything felt still as I looked at her fragile body and those blank eyes. A sound pulled me back to reality, and a dull light flickered on above me near the creaking stairs. I turned to face the stairs, standing up straight. At first, he didn't notice me in the dim light. He stood on the bottom step, holding a hammer loosely in his hand, with his pale blonde hair glowing from the light behind him. Then he saw me standing quietly, ready to face him. His eyes went to the badge at my belt for a moment. He let go of the hammer and carefully stepped away from it, raising his hands. I knew there was something I was supposed to say, the words for his arrest, his trial, his time in custody. But the words wouldn't come. His eyes shifted to the crumpled figure in the corner, and he smiled, his white teeth shining faintly. I can't remember pulling the trigger, but I saw the shock in his eyes as he understood he was in trouble. I try hard to recall that look when my nightmares come. I hold on to it. Then the team arrived upstairs, their footsteps loud and swift. They came just as the sound of my shots faded. Moving down the stairs like a well-oiled machine, bright lights shining, their presence was strong and commanding. a force that seemed unstoppable. Sharp calls of "Clear!" echoed through the house. The leader of the team took off his helmet as he looked around the basement. It was Mike. He took in the whole scene with one careful glance as if he'd seen it unfold. I stood there, aware of my own actions, waiting for him to ask for an explanation I couldn't give. It was clear he understood everything. His foot slid the hammer next to the fallen figure. He looked straight into my eyes and said quietly, "We heard you identify yourself and tell him to drop the weapon. He came forward with it, and you fired twice." He glanced down at the figure on the ground and then back at me. "Stick to the story." Nobody questioned the reports. I could see Mike's influence in them. I felt no remorse. The required counseling sessions dug deep into my feelings about what happened, but they never asked the real question. My dreams were always filled with the cold blue eyes of a child. But I was the favored daughter now. A month after the required break, I was chosen for special training for secret missions. I had never seen training like this. It was extremely realistic and tough. The pressure was unyielding, and I was so exhausted that I didn't dream at all. We took psychological tests every week. I had been raised to be the Reinhardt heir, and no one was stronger than I. But even for me, it was a never-ending series of challenges. Sleepless nights in all kinds of weather and rough terrain, constant questioning, endless close combat training. None of it was like the usual step-by-step safety-first training. I embraced it with fierce determination. The final test was overwhelming. They took my biggest fear and made it part of a tough situation. When I was 12, I was caught in a riptide. I had often been reminded of my weakness when faced with strong challenges. My evaluations pointed out my struggles with the choices my parents made, connecting my fears in a way that felt unfair. When I found myself in a tough situation, I felt small against the great strength of my opponent. He had been chosen for his abilities and was told how to make me feel unsure of myself. It was daunting, but I realized I faced an old fear, one that was fading. I had faced stronger foes in my dreams, and now I was ready to meet this one. I stepped into the challenge. My opponent stood strong, having trained hard. Even after I gave my best effort, he stayed upright and responsive. I felt my body tiring as he moved toward my weaker side. Yet that wasn't what troubled me most. During our earlier encounters, I noticed something in his eyes. We both realized we were part of an unusual test. For a moment, I felt a warmth that was new to me. But that connection came at a price. I had always kept others away, cautious of my parents and the people they might send my way, those who could easily win over anyone or who could be influenced by money. My parents had many resources, and I worried they still had plans for me. As the scenario ended and he guided me toward the infirmary, I felt a bond between us. I leaned toward him instinctively but quickly reminded myself to keep some distance. He kindly offered his shirt, allowing me to rest my arm on his shoulder. While we waited for the doctor, we shared light jokes, and I could feel our bond growing. There was a connection beyond just friendliness. I realized how easy it would have been to let that boundary slip, but I focused on staying firm. A few more minutes, and I might have lost my reservations. Just then, the doctor arrived. After I got my crutches and started to leave, I looked back to see him watching me. Part of me wanted to return and share my real name. Another part just wanted to escape quickly. I kept his shirt and wore it for a month without washing it. You'd think that would be unpleasant. But somehow it wasn't. With him far away, I let myself dream a little about a normal life. The mix of our energy on that shirt represented something that could have been, maybe, in a different time. Eventually, I washed the shirt on high heat to set the stain. I learned that lesson the hard way. It would be 2 more years before I saw him again. During those 2 years, I worked hard to prove myself. I wanted to be the best agent possible. I had the background, the skills, and the drive to succeed. Chasing cases helped me manage my own troubles. The dreams of blue eyes came less often, but they still disturbed my sleep. I put in a lot of effort, and I had support. I knew Mike believed in me, which meant a lot. I got assigned to headquarters. I mostly dealt with organized crime. It's not as exciting as counterterrorism, but there's always a lot to do because of drugs. But it wasn't all about drugs. I spent 6 weeks as a waitress in a bar in San Angelo while helping to take down one of the biggest cattle theft rings ever. We worked with the Texas Rangers on it. They're a great group. But cattle theft in Texas? You can imagine the jokes. Some jokester put a cowboy hat up in my cubicle. But I have the real thing at home, along with sparkly boots, jeans, a western shirt, and a bandana. I still have my waitress uniform, too. Once, I almost found myself in trouble while working in Canada, over cheese and maple syrup. It's true. Cheese has high taxes in Canada, so smuggling rings move cheese north and unlicensed syrup south across the border. I spent 4 weeks in the cold wearing flannel shirts and staying in a simple room above a pizzeria. Things turned risky just before we served warrants, leading to a hectic chase in a cheese warehouse with a Canadian police officer. They take their cheese very seriously. As for my personal life, I didn't have one. I focused all my energy on my work. I didn't trust anyone who might be swayed by the Reinhardt's wealth. The closest I came to a relationship was a few fun moments with another agent named Kat, while we pretended to be a couple running an art gallery. I didn't take it seriously. My time in an all-girls school made that easy. But for Kat, it was a turning point. She realized that her ongoing issues with relationships were linked to her being gay. She left the agency and got a girlfriend, Monica, who owns a cupcake shop. It's true, and she loves to wear tie-dye. Actually, she takes it to a new level. But they looked very happy together. Monica tried to stay away when she found out about Kat's past with me, but eventually she saw I wasn't a concern. I wasn't into relationships. I didn't have many close friends, just Kat and Monica, and I kept them at a distance. But work was good. I was good at planning and carrying things out, thanks to how I grew up, and that was noticed by my coworkers. Honestly, I was very dedicated and driven. I didn't see it until I bumped into Mike in the hallway outside the office. Danger Mouse. That was a nickname just the HRT team used, and it came with a hint of respect. I smiled a little. Mike, I hear you've been doing great work. I knew you would succeed. I knew you were one of us. He paused, looking serious. Keep it up, Mouse. Someone needs to stand up to the bad guys. One of us. Those words hit me hard. Mike wasn't just any agent. He was the head of HRT, a true leader. He believed in our mission in every way that mattered, and I understood he was right. I wasn't just doing this job for myself anymore. My drive was still strong, but I had a bigger purpose. I really believed. For the first time, I was following a dream for a better world. Life moved quickly. Then one day, while I was working out in the gym, an older woman started jogging on the treadmill beside mine. I didn't pay much attention. She seemed like just someone's secretary. Still, she was a good runner. I hear you're the star around here. Maybe the next Hawthorne, she said. Maria Hawthorne was the executive assistant director. I had heard her name mentioned often. She was known as the toughest person around, someone even congressmen respected. Early in her career, she took down many illegal operations. I wasn't sure how true the stories about her were, but they said she was quite accomplished. I shrugged. Maybe, but if that means being stuck in an office, that's not what I want. We talked a bit, mostly small talk, and I forgot all about it by the end of the day. I was right. She was indeed someone's secretary. Maria's secretary. A week later, when I entered Maria Hawthorne's office, I realized I had been caught off guard when I saw her secretary. She just smiled and motioned for me to go in. I had received a simple yellow memo on my desk telling me to come. Tall and slim, with neatly arranged dark brown hair, Maria was standing beside her desk when I walked in. She reached out her hand. Nice to meet the next me. Or so I hear. I was getting ready to explain, but she smiled and cut me off. Let's go for a walk, Emma. She took me outside the building. In just a minute or two, we were heading south toward the Smithsonian. We walked quietly for a bit until we were away from the crowd. Mike suggested you. Suggested me for what? I asked, intrigued. I have a challenge I'm dealing with. I sometimes talk things over with him. He gives me good advice. I could tell their relationship was more than just work, especially since she was single and Mike was known to be too. I pushed that thought aside as she continued. We have a case. The team brought it to my attention this morning. It looks good on paper, but I have some concerns. We're tracking a Romanian group that's managed to avoid capture before. It's a different part of their operation, but we've come up short too many times to ignore it. These individuals pose real threats, and if we can't manage it, innocent people could face serious harm. I pictured a pair of blue eyes for a moment. So, what do you want me to do? I want to use some outside help. These people might have inside knowledge that lets them anticipate our moves. Or, she paused. Or what? Or we might have a problem within our team. There's a lot of money at stake here. Even the FBI isn't perfect. The silence felt heavy as I took in what she said. She added, "You must remain trustworthy. I know your background. You could leave today and find financial security easily. I'm sure they would welcome you back." It still felt focused on money, but she continued, "That alone isn't enough. Mike thinks you're the best choice for this. You're willing to do what's necessary. You've also worked with different outside agencies and earned their trust. Not everyone can manage that." We took a short break as we got close to one of the many food stands around the Smithsonian. She bought a couple of gyros, and I said I was interested in seeing how they were made. Maria raised an eyebrow. "I worked at a gyro stand in New York for a while during my time at surveillance. They often keep some made ahead of time to speed things up. They can be hours or even days old." We found a bench and sat down to eat. "I'm pulling the team from the bureau. I'll let them know that my legal team recommends we focus on the other end of the operation. The only people from the bureau who will know about this are you, me, Mike, and my assistant. I called in a favor with the director. I'm going to use an army operation. Cumulus Green." That didn't sound familiar, so I showed my confusion. She shook her head. "It shouldn't. They don't deal with domestic issues. But I can have some of them loaned to us as resources for counter-terrorism work, just for technical support." I felt uncertain and shared my worries. A group of soldiers roaming around might cause more trouble than having an inside leak. "These aren't regular soldiers. They handle tasks around the world, mostly in counter-terrorism. They are among the best because of the tough situations they face. When they're called in, it means things are serious. They know what they're doing, but they aren't police. Last time we worked with one, it didn't go well. The Cumulus resource acted quickly to a threat without trying to calm things down. It created quite a reaction. They aren't too eager to work with us again, and I had to ask the director to step in." That sounded worrying. It seemed likely they wouldn't be pleased with me. "So, are you on board? Turning down this kind of chance could ruin my career." I finished my meal and looked around. "I'm in." Cumulus Green was a small converted warehouse off a side road near Georgetown with underground parking. The sign said Calliope Ltd. and looked harmless, but the parking attendant had a serious manner about him, always alert. The 4 security guards we met inside had the same vibe. A secretary checked our IDs, confirmed our appointment, and let us in. One of the guards walked us inside. I'm not sure what I expected, but it looked like an ordinary office, maybe a bit older than mine. The people here were different. While the FBI had polished professionals, this place felt like a mix of individuals with different experiences. They wore standard suits, but they seemed a little more unique than what you might find at the bureau. What stood out to me was their cautious looks as they watched us. It felt like they weren't very fond of law enforcement. We were taken to an office with a conference table where a woman in a sharp suit welcomed us. After Maria introduced everyone, she simply said, "You can call me Donna." Maria seemed ready for this and explained what we needed. She also mentioned her worries about a possible issue somewhere in the Justice Department. Donna signaled to her secretary to call Eric, who turned out to be a short, heavy-set guy. He asked me to go with him to check on the technical help I needed. We walked down 3 flights of stairs to the basement, passing a gym and training area before we reached a room filled with a messy assortment of electronics. We carefully moved through cables, boxes, and half-built computers until we got to some shelves at the back. It was like finding a treasure chest of amazing surveillance tools, some of which I had never seen. Many were meant for use outside the country. I felt excited as we headed back up the stairs, but then I found myself in the middle of a tense situation. I saw someone I knew. A wave of feelings rushed over me like an old crush. I started to make jokes, and he quickly joined in, sharing a knowing glance and a half-smile. Donna seemed okay with the joking, Maria looked interested, and her assistant appeared puzzled. I decided to explain how we met, leaving out some details that didn't feel necessary. I certainly didn't mention how my heart was racing. My logical mind told me to be careful, but I felt something different. When he agreed to help me, I felt both relieved and nervous. I asked Maria's assistant for my notes, sat down at the table, and we began going over plans. By the time I looked up, Maria, Donna, and the assistant had gone into another room. We focused on the mission, discussing our strategies and priorities. He was especially impressed with my emergency exit plan. The toughest part would be the initial setup, and he worked on a list of people for that. Legally, he would be the only one loaned to us. His team could bring in gear and set it up, but couldn't use it. Still, they could show an FBI agent how to operate it while it was happening, so I needed to ask Maria to bring in 2 more agents for that. He was professional and respectful, and I found him a bit distracting. Apparently, he had been at the beach and still carried a hint of cologne mixed with a fresh, beachy smell. He also had a habit of looking me directly in the eyes. By the time we finished, we hadn't shared much about our personal lives, but I did manage to let him know I wasn't seeing anyone. I learned that he wasn't either. That added to the struggle I was feeling inside. Moving into the Romanian neighborhood was an eye-opener. The Cumulus Green team acted as convincingly as possible. One couple burst out of their car, arguing loudly about his actions at a party the weekend before. He had been thoughtless the entire time, and it was clear they had been having this argument for a while, trying to stay together. It all seemed quite silly. They had only been paired together as a couple for 3 days. Setting up was simple, with some classic furniture and lots of laughter. When my partner went out for pizza, he returned with food for everyone and flowers for me. It might not have seemed like a big deal, but it was the first time someone had given me flowers, and I think my surprise showed. One of the other women noticed the flowers and teased, "Ooh, looks like someone's in for something special tonight." His eyes lit up as we playfully fought on the bed, me leaning over him while he held a light blue towel around his waist, which didn't stay secure for long. I tried to hold his wrists with one hand while still being playful. He was strong and focused on getting free. I had caught him off guard in the dim room. I took a small item from his hand to keep things safe while we rolled onto the bed. I was sitting on top of him, making it hard for him to push me away. For a moment our eyes met and I noticed a small smile on his face. Everything felt easy and fun. Our mission went really well. Maria's trust in our team was well placed. We worked effectively together, and I found it hard to keep my hands to myself, and I could tell he felt the same way. At first, I thought it was just a crush, but soon I realized we had something deeper. We shared our stories, and I talked about escaping my past. He told me about his small-town life that led him to be a team leader. In some ways, he reminded me of Mike, someone who truly cared about his work. He may not have received much credit, but he wanted to make a positive difference in the world. At least that was his hope. I never told him about the harmful effects of the Reinhardt money and how it spoiled everything it touched. That dangerous wealth was why I couldn't stay with him. Sooner or later, it would affect him too, and I couldn't face that possibility. I admitted to myself that I was genuinely in love with him. I didn't want to see him hurt by what was bound to happen. I let him believe it was all about my ambitions. I wanted him to think it was my work keeping me away. I felt needy and fragile, and even though he understood my choice, he was supportive. I felt like a part of me was breaking. Then things took a turn for the worse. I missed my period. Like women have done for ages, I prayed and hoped. I took a deep breath. But nothing happened. Working at the women's health clinic gave me easy access to pregnancy tests. The test showed a plus sign. Growing up with the Reinhardt taught me to stay calm in tough situations. I thought I could handle this on my own. The solution seemed simple. I could remove the surprise that I never expected or wanted. Having a child was never in my plans. The first time I babysat was only because of this job. Even if we were completely committed to each other, who would want a life full of disorder? Like those kids he was great with, the ones I had to hold on the couch to help them sleep. That night I had a nightmare for the first time since starting this job. I never thought a dream could feel worse. The cold blue eyes stared at me as her head moved in a strange way, but this time her lips moved, and I heard her voice. "Mommy, please." I woke up, catching a scream in my throat, trying to hold back the pain. He stirred beside me but didn't wake up. I lay there, soaked in sweat, and after a moment I got out of bed, moving carefully across the dark room. I went to the bathroom, torn between wanting to wake him and wanting to keep it to myself. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the tub. As the nightmare faded, I told myself I was doing the right thing for both of us. Our careers and lives weren't meant for this. I was more afraid of what the Reinhardt could do to him than anything else. It was just a bunch of cells growing, not a person yet. I finally calmed down enough, stood up, and looked at the medicine cabinet. I saw my reflection in the mirror. The cold blue eyes looking back at me felt distant. It reminded me of ice from a glacier. The mission finished without making big news, but the important stories are often the ones that never get told. That mission could have defined my career. Now I stood in Maria's office, clearly pregnant. I had been avoiding her for 2 months after my first meeting about the mission. Then I took 3 months off to recover, saying I needed a break. So here I was, waiting for her reaction to my choices. She tilted her head and asked, "So have you told him?" Everything came pouring out, my fears and worries. She invited me to sit on her couch and listened as I shared what I was feeling. In the end, she didn't fully agree with my choice not to tell him, but she supported me. She said I was too valuable to lose. I was moved from secret missions to planning for counterterrorism. It was a big step up. Kat and Monica were amazing support. They even helped me prepare for the delivery. I think we missed some important things along the way. They gave me Ellie. Her eyes were the brightest blue, like sapphires. They felt warm and loving. Working in CT plans meant I was home a lot, and when I wasn't, Kat and Monica were there for us. I thought about calling him nearly every day, but I worried about the outcome. I cared too much for him to risk his safety. I didn't have those uncertain dreams anymore, but I tiptoed to Ellie's room several nights a week. I wanted to check on her, hold her, and make sure she felt secure. Years passed, and Ellie grew up. I don't remember much about Istanbul, just that I was there for 3 weeks and 2 days. I remember getting on the plane, thinking I would return ready to update Kat and Monica's power of attorney. Then I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by familiar faces, especially his. He wasn't angry, just sad about the time lost with Ellie. People in our situation can be practical, so he understood my reasons. It would take years before I could tell him the whole story. I must have kept some awareness from the long sleep. Losing my leg was not a shock. But when I heard about Evelyn, I felt a rush of worry. When she came in, she was different. She wore blue jeans, and her behavior had changed completely. Her eyes showed deep sadness. I had never heard her say sorry for anything, until now. She didn't ask for forgiveness, thinking she didn't deserve it, but for a chance to be a part of Ellie's life. A small hope for a fresh start. I set clear rules and watched her closely. She had already told the Reinhardt to stay away for good. Still, she bent the rules a little. He believes the sword on the wall that she gave him for his birthday is a replica of Napoleon's sword from the Battle of the Bridge of Lodi. It's not a replica. But only Evelyn and I know that. So many years have gone by. Yesterday, I held my granddaughter for the first time. Her name is Elisa, and she is amazing. She has the brightest blue topaz eyes I've ever seen. Behind blue eyes. The curtains on the farmhouse windows had a simple, colorful pattern. It felt a bit strange to me. I guess it matched the old farmhouse, which was about 150 years old, but it didn't fit what I expected about my targets. I tried to find that calm place I had learned to focus on, but it just wasn't there. I had waited so long for this moment and that stillness, but I couldn't settle down to enjoy it. Lying in the tall, dry grass with the gentle breeze should have felt peaceful. I was in a good spot and quite comfortable. It would have been nice to have someone with me, but other than that, everything felt perfect. Still, I couldn't relax. My thoughts went back to why I was hidden in that grass, and a big wave of sadness came over me. I couldn't even remember Gabby's laugh anymore. I thought I remembered it just a couple of weeks ago, but now it felt distant, even Trisha's smile. Sometimes I wondered if I was the only one who remembered them. I thought if I could just get some real sleep, I might recall it all again. Suddenly, the front door opened, and a figure walked out onto the wide wooden porch. She looked graceful, even in old, faded blue jeans and a big, worn jacket. The wind played with her long silver hair until she pushed it back behind her ears, seeming a bit impatient. I hadn't expected her to be at the house yet. She and the others were supposed to arrive in an hour or two from their Thanksgiving trip. She looked around for a moment and then lifted her gaze, right toward me. I could see her clear blue eyes through my scope as they rested on my spot. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, but it quickly became clear. She seemed to know I was there. She couldn't see me, but she felt my presence. With a sense of acceptance, she started to walk slowly toward my direction. It was a long distance, almost 700 meters according to my scope, and I carefully watched her navigate through the waving grass. She had left her jacket unzipped, revealing just a flannel shirt underneath. That was likely on purpose. The breeze occasionally caught her, and she would instinctively pull the jacket closed for a moment, trying to keep warm. Then she would let it hang open, almost automatically. She wanted me to see that she had no weapon, no extra gear. I looked around me. There was no one else in sight. I had a clear view across the open fields, and aside from this one, all of them had been cut for hay late in the summer, leaving them almost bare. My confusion and curiosity let her reach the bottom of the small hill, where she paused. Carefully, she stepped over a dry creek where a little water had carved a shallow path. Her light blue boots, decorated with colorful patterns, glimmered in the sun, standing out against her simple, worn farm clothes. As she made her way up the small hill, I sat up, leaving the rifle beside me, and took out my revolver. It was an older type that not many people used anymore, but it meant a lot to me. The Colt Python was known for being one of the best revolvers ever made. I had always wanted to have mine nearby. I pushed back the hood of my outfit and pulled down the mask. She looked at me with a polite smile and nodded, then settled a few feet away, wrapping her arms around her knees as she gazed at the farmhouse. We sat in silence for what felt like forever. They won't be coming, you know. It's just me. Her voice was refined and smooth, almost musical despite sounding formal. I figured that. We continued to sit quietly, watching the grass sway like waves in the ocean until the wind picked up, as if it wanted to break the silence. I have coffee at the house if you'd like some. She seemed calm and composed. Suddenly I felt like a child playing a game. I put away my revolver, stood up, and picked up the rifle, folding the bipod and slinging it over my shoulder. She sat slightly curled up in her oversized jacket, looking up at me with bright blue eyes. I reached down to help her up. She took my hand and stood gracefully, as if it were the most natural thing. It was strange to think that this person was behind so much pain in my life, the person I had chased for so long, giving up so much to reach this moment. We walked carefully down the little hill. She held onto my arm to help herself over a small dip, a simple action to her. When we entered the house, I felt a fleeting worry, but it was empty inside. A worn military sword hung over the fireplace beneath a painting of an old battle from the 17th century. We can sit in the kitchen or the parlor. The kitchen would be nice. I leaned the rifle against a wall in the spacious kitchen, making sure it was secure. I felt ready for anything if someone arrived unexpectedly. If it came to that, I would only need one bullet. Now that the other targets were out of reach, I truly didn't care what happened next. She hung her jacket on some hooks by the kitchen door, and I hung my poncho beside it, then sat on one of the high stools at the tall, rustic table. No reason to be rude. She carefully poured rich black coffee into 2 sturdy John Deere tractor mugs. I always imagined her as delicate, like fine china, but she seemed totally at ease as she settled onto a stool across from me. There was no cream or sugar offered. She took a small sip and closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the taste. The coffee was really good. "Do you prefer Ken or Kenneth, or should I call you Colonel Howard?" she asked. "Ken is fine." I hesitated, feeling a bit uncomfortable. "And you?" "It's usually Evelyn, but I'd like to be called Evie here, if that's okay." I looked around at the dried peppers and garlic hanging from the door frames and cabinets. Calling her Evie felt more natural in this cozy setting. "So, how did you know I was here?" I asked. "Maria contacted us last night. She's been keeping an eye on you since that situation in Macau, the one with those young women." I stopped, surprised. She had some part in what took place back then. As for Maria, Deputy Director Maria Hawthorne of the FBI, I hoped she wasn't watching me too closely. Wishing for good luck isn't a solid plan. It's all I had right now, but I needed to be careful not to draw attention to myself. Depending on how involved she was, there could be a team ready to act at any moment, but I felt that Evie was safe here. She continued, "Maria wanted to understand your motives, why your group would be interested. She was thankful for the help you provided, but her curiosity grew. I needed the documents, shipping lists, contact details, everything. She and her team were so focused on helping those young women that my team had a good chance to gather that information. She thought so. She mentioned that some people went missing before she could reach them. I nodded. I needed more answers. Evie took another sip. She eventually pieced things together and figured out what you were planning today. She had Homeland watching your travel. They noticed your plane ticket to BWI. I had left too many clues over time. It felt like it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. I had to take risks to get the information I needed, but it seemed I had caught the attention of someone who understood more than I realized. I didn't get why Hawthorne hadn't just arrested me. If she knew this much, she should have understood that I wasn't a danger to her agents. Who told you I'd be on that hill? Maria's friend, Michael. He said it was the only logical place someone skilled would choose. He seemed to know more about your group than anyone else. She paused briefly. Given your reasons for being there, I asked Maria to let me take care of it. I shut my eyes, trying to block out some unwelcome memories. She kept talking, unaware of my thoughts. I asked her not to get involved, just to keep Emma and her family safe from it all. She didn't like it, but agreed. Personal promises matter to her. She really cares about Emma. Sometimes I think Maria takes care of her more than I do, she said softly, her voice trailing off with a hint of sadness. I wasn't sure what she meant. Maybe she wanted sympathy, or maybe she didn't want anything at all. It didn't really matter. If she felt she had let her daughter down, that was for her to handle. At least her daughter was still here. I hadn't had that choice. I would have done anything to have Trisha and Gabby back, to feel like a family man again. All I wanted was to be a great dad. But if I couldn't have that, I would settle for making things right. She looked down, staring at the floor for a moment. Your plan won't work. You can't hurt him through us. I understand why you want to, but he doesn't care about us at all. We stopped mattering to him once he knew Emma wanted nothing to do with him. My situation might even make things easier for him. She closed her eyes and raised her hand slightly. Sorry, that sounded a bit discouraging. I'm not trying to avoid my responsibilities or the results of my actions. My family name was tied to those businesses and the money transfers. I should have paid more attention. It really is inexcusable. I had a feeling it was something like that. The trouble went back much further on his side than on hers, but she was right. It was inexcusable. Unforgivable might be a better word. Emma and her family deserve to stay out of this. She isn't involved. If she's not connected to him, then why is she linked to the FBI? She looked truly surprised by this. Oh, I never thought about how that would look. She stared into her coffee, watching the steam rise and disappear. She didn't reach out to the FBI. She was looking for safety. From him, from us, where the influence couldn't find her. She hated us, hated the wealth. She might never forgive me for how we raised her and the choices we made for her. She gave a small, ironic smile. I'm lucky she lets me be part of the kids' lives at all. She gestured to her own clothes. She thinks this is some kind of way for me to make up for it. I raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? From what I've seen, it's clear that denim and flannel aren't exactly your style. She shook her head, a genuine smile brightening her face. Not my style, but I found it's what I want. Everything else feels so shallow. I took that in. It all felt true. I had been misled by people when they were at their most desperate, not for long, and never again. If it was all true, and if I made it through this, I would need to find another way to deal with him. She took my silence as a sign to continue talking. She shouldn't have. It was almost too much for her to handle. I'm sorry about Patricia and Gabriella. Stop! I stood up, my hand hitting the table. Frustration and pain surged inside me. Memories flooded my mind. Thoughts of my wife and little girl. Feelings of loss washed over me. A news story had mentioned that the passengers were likely aware of their fate for the 10 minutes before the plane crashed after the explosion. That thought stuck with me, haunting me. I imagined Trisha holding Gabby close, waiting for help that would never come. She seemed taken aback. Then she sat very still. You don't get to say sorry about them. You can't. Not about Trisha and Gabby. For a moment, I felt the weight of a heavy load in my thoughts. She looked at me, slightly lifting her chin as if inviting me to speak. She didn't look angry or afraid. She looked resigned. I struggled to set those thoughts aside. Even she, calm as she was, let out a small sigh. I sat back down, the noise in my mind starting to quiet. We sat in silence, staring past each other. She spoke first, showing great courage. Apologizing was just an instinct, Ken. I don't expect you to accept it or even respond. You're right. Some things can never be forgiven. I closed my eyes for a moment and took a deep breath, the rich smell of coffee calming me a bit. She continued, persistent as ever. It took me a long time to understand what was happening and even longer to accept that Eric could do such things. Even when Maria explained it, I struggled to believe it. It meant I played a part in his actions, even without knowing. Capable was the right word. Somewhere along the way, the Reinhardt Group realized they could influence the stock market with a few carefully planned events. The vast company, Reinhardt IG, was so powerful that different parts could benefit from sudden market changes in various ways. A fire at an oil plant, a breakdown at a factory, a conflict in another country, or the attack on a plane. After I became the leader of a special mission unit, which had always been more myth than reality, I initially used it to take down the group involved in the incident, only to find they were part of a much bigger plan. But I still had that unit at my disposal. The strength of a black unit is that it operates with less oversight. No one asks many questions about what it does as long as it stays within certain limits. Because what you don't know, you can't be called to talk about in front of Congress. Once I confirmed the unit was real, I took the steps needed to lead it. It changed to better suit my goals. The unit kept its original purpose but added new functions that I found important. I used those resources to help my plans. If anyone found out what I had done, I could end up in jail for a long time due to illegal methods and actions without permission. The outside-the-law actions alone could bring serious trouble, but I believed those I targeted had it coming. I felt safe that I wouldn't be charged with betrayal, though that would depend on how people saw it. I chose my team carefully. When I needed a senior non-commissioned officer, I brought in Sergeant Major Godek. It was surprising how we became good friends. He was the only real friend I had in the last 30 years. I liked him not only for his skills, but also for the connection he gave me to the Cumulus programs through his sister Donna. Curiously, this helped me keep an eye on Emma Reinhardt and her work at the FBI when she married someone from Cumulus. I had a plan for an eye for the Reinhardt. He would feel a loss too before I confronted him. Finding Emma Reinhardt took some time, and when I did, I learned there was a group in Turkey that had also been trying to find her. Ironic, that was the only word for it. She brought me back to reality. The only things he cares about are money and power. If you take me out of the picture, he won't be unaffected when the stock market shifts. That's all I can offer. She stayed quiet for a moment, then stood up to refill our cups. I assume Maria looked into my background. Did she say anything about my past before I joined OCS and Special Forces? She shared a little, something about enlisting, maybe a sergeant. I worked in finance, handling numbers. I joined the military to pay for my accounting degree. That's why I know that your loss won't really hurt him. She shook her head and frowned in thought. It'd be temporary. He'd bounce back quickly. Reinhardt might even gain from it. Big companies and banks often profit from good and bad news. A slight smile appeared on my face at the thought. Whether you live or die, Reinhardt will be fine. As long as he knows what's happening, they'll still make money. I finished my coffee. It's the uncertainty, the not knowing that they can't stand. I let Evie write a note to her daughter, reminding her that Maria promised not to interfere at all. When I told her to find some clothes to take with her, she looked confused for a moment, unsure if I was truly going to let her leave. I don't have any clothes here. They're at my house, she said, pointing east toward a small cottage. No, find something here, I insisted. She opened a box filled with skirts, blouses, t-shirts, shoes, and other items from what seemed like a spare bedroom. I must have looked confused, and she gave me a quirky smile. Monica left these when Kat went to England for a fellowship. It'll be a while before she needs them back. Tie-dye should be banned, I joked. Trust me, no one who knows me would believe it's really me if they saw me in this. From what I learned about Evelyn Cabot, that seemed true. I chose a pair of jeans with colorful peace signs on the back pockets, a bright blue blouse, some simple shoes, and a beaded denim jacket, placing them on the bed. Change over there in the corner, I said. She shrugged but started to take off her boots. I don't have anything else on under them. If she thought I would let my guard down for her comfort, she was wrong. I'm just making sure you don't have anything dangerous. She glanced at me as she took off her other boot. I don't get much attention these days. You should have seen me 20 years ago. She changed quickly, appearing confident. That's fine, you can get dressed now. The only thing she seemed to miss was her favorite boots. So what now? She asked. I led her across the fields to the car I had borrowed. It was a bit of a walk, but the weather felt nice. Once inside the car, she sat quietly, looking out at the passing scenery as we drove south. I warned her that if she caused me any trouble, someone would have to check on her daughter and grandchildren. While I couldn't deal with Reinhardt directly, I had ways to make sure she would cooperate. She sank into her seat a little, but nodded, understanding. I needed to switch cars soon, but I had made arrangements that just needed a few changes. It was nearly 140 miles to Needle's salvage yard. He had once been a team medic, and I had done my best to support him during the tough times he faced after a difficult divorce. I had worked with him about the car we were using. He would send it to a crusher as soon as we left. I had also left my bags with him before heading to the farm. When we arrived, he opened the door. His mustache had grown so much that it almost covered his face under his faded fishing hat. He looked a bit surprised when Evie got out on the other side, but he knew better than to ask any questions. It wasn't just the money he received from me, although that was likely enough for the trouble. It was also the loyalty that comes from spending time together in tough situations. He motioned for us to enter his office trailer. I need a place we can stay for a few weeks, like a van or a larger car. Getting around just became a lot tougher, and I need to give my travel agent some time to sort things out. He took off his hat, scratched his head for a moment, then looked at Evie with a friendly smile. I have just the thing, boss. The paperwork is all good, no one is looking for it, and it's just right. Wait here, it might take about an hour. It was nearly 50 minutes later when he drove it around to the front. We walked out to meet him, and I grabbed my bags. The engine sounded nice, but that was where the appeal stopped. It was an older, mostly white RV, covered in stickers, with a hand-painted sign on the back that read, "If the campers are rockin', don't come knockin'." The sides were decorated with large, faded pictures from an old concert poster. Even the curtains seemed to be a mix of blue and black. Needle stepped out from the driver's seat with a big smile. It's in better shape than it seems. It's a 1974 Econoline 300 Shasta RV, Class C. Everything inside works well. The stove, toilet, and shower are all good. Maybe a bit outdated, but it's all functional. I filled the water tank and charged up the gas for you, even filled the fuel tank. I got it at an auction for almost nothing 6 months ago. It had been stored for about 20 years, but it started right up when I turned the key. He waved toward the design on the side. I thought you and your friend would enjoy some comfortable travel. I looked over at Evie. She seemed on the verge of tears, but then I realized she was trying not to laugh. We needed to leave before Needles learned anything that could be harmful for him. Still, anyone trying to get something from him would soon realize that my team wasn't just harmless. To be honest, 2 old hippies in an old RV weren't exactly on the list of things I worried about. You checked it, right? Yeah, I found some old plant material tucked under the wheel well, but that's all. I didn't ask what he did with it. That was not my concern anymore. From his description, it probably wasn't strong anyway. Evie looked at me and then at the side door of the RV, quietly waiting for my go-ahead. I nodded for her to go in. She understood the risks of making any mistakes. She opened the door and climbed into the camper, bringing her bag of clothes with her, while Needles and I walked around the old vehicle. The tires looked surprisingly fine, and everything else seemed to work well enough. As I walked to the back of the camper, she opened the back window. It's great in here. There's a comfortable queen-size bed and plenty of room to relax, she said. Her sweet, smooth voice was gone, replaced by a strong southern accent. But it was her wink and playful tone that really surprised me. Needles smiled. See? Perfect. He paused. Let me grab the spare keys for you two. As he stepped inside the office, I turned to Evie. She gave a small smile. Maggie the cat from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I took some drama classes. Keeping an eye on the door, she asked, He doesn't know anything, right? Not really. Just returning a favor or two. Her face changed a little. What if Eric's men find him? Then, most likely, there will be some trouble and Needles will keep a low profile. Shouldn't you tell him to be careful? Just my presence here is enough warning. He's aware. She looked a bit unsure, but I understood. When we first entered his office, I noticed him glance at his safe. I guessed there were a few handguns and maybe something else stored there. The yard wasn't a place for traditional rifles. He probably had more hidden away, too. He came back out with an old backpack. I packed a medical kit with some extra supplies, he said. As he handed it to me, he quietly added, "There's a clean pistol and some extra magazines in the bottom. I know you love your antique firearm, and it's truly special. But come on, boss. 6 rounds isn't enough for a quick reload." He knew how I felt about it. I nodded my thanks. At least it wasn't one of those modern popular ones. We hit the road half an hour later, heading south, and she seemed too relaxed for my liking. She had found an old atlas in the camper and started looking through it. "You know, I've never seen the Grand Canyon," she said. "I'm not sure you get the whole kidnap victim thing," I replied. She shrugged and kept tracing routes with her finger. Her nails were shorter than I expected. "You said this might take weeks or months. There's no reason to be unhappy the whole time. I promise to see this through so you don't have to worry about me. Besides, maybe I'll start to see things differently over time." "That's fine, but this isn't a vacation. And I don't plan on going anywhere where we might get stuck in the snow." I thought I saw her give a small secret smile, but I couldn't be sure. Blue Highways. That was the book. Once there was a man named Least Heat Moon. He wrote a book about traveling the quiet roads of America. I found an old copy of it while flying across the Pacific Ocean in a C-141 plane that felt shaky and old. Least Heat Moon had journeyed thousands of miles along back roads and smaller highways. I decided to do something similar. If I saw a road labeled Interstate, I planned to steer clear. I wanted to skip the big cities. My plan was to go south to Florida from Virginia, then head west on a winding route until I reached my next stop. Evie pointed out that my idea was a bit strange since my plan had been on the New York Times bestseller list for nearly a year. She raised an eyebrow. "So, are we going to stop at all the little diners, too? I've read the book. I always wondered what it would be like to just travel without a goal or a timeline." I shrugged, focusing on the road. "I don't know. I've always had a destination." She was quiet for a while after that. The only gadget I had was a new tablet. I bought it a while ago at a Walmart, but I had never used it until we stopped at a McDonald's in Catawba County, North Carolina. There, I set up a Yahoo account and bought a vintage toy plane online. I ended up buying 2 so they could be shipped together. By the time we finished eating, which was just me since Evie didn't like McDonald's, I had a message. In 3 months, I could get 2 toy planes of the same kind. But they would cost 3 times what I paid now. Evie watched me closely while I did this. Normally, you wouldn't let someone see you buy things like this, but I knew she wouldn't do anything that might put her grandchildren in danger. I had seen how she talked about them. "I have a feeling this has something to do with our trip," she said. "It's $30,000 for safe travel for 2 from California to Fiji, and it will take 3 months. I knew how to get us to our final stop without dealing with customs." "Can I ask, where are we headed?" "You may not. That's part of the whole kidnap victim thing. But if I need to, I can cancel the Fiji part." "Oh, okay, that makes sense. We don't want to have the police waiting for me at the airport if I try to escape." I thought about saying more, but it didn't seem needed. "Yeah, that's right. Honestly, I wasn't too worried. Once we reached the islands, I was sure the local police wouldn't let the FBI or any outside help interfere. Chief Frank Rotuma owed me a favor or two and didn't like outsiders meddling in local affairs. Thinking about someone confronting me back at the shack with Pogo, his lively wife, and Monster made me smile. They'd better send someone they didn't want to deal with again. Is something funny? A little, just thinking about the challenges of being a police officer. I didn't feel the need to explain any further. That first night, she seemed nervous. We parked in a Walmart lot. She changed into a t-shirt and shorts in the small bathroom of the camper. It felt like she was preparing herself, worried that I might expect something from her. The only thing I wanted was to get some sleep. I hadn't rested well for over 30 years. Light sleeper didn't really explain it. I wasn't worried she would catch me off guard. I tossed a blanket and pillow on her side of the bed and added another set for myself. I thought it would be good to remind her that I had friends who would check on her family if something went wrong. I have friends. If there's trouble, they will help your daughter and grandkids. I wasn't completely sure about that, especially concerning the grandchildren. Monster seemed a little strange about kids. If he saw Emma as a threat, she could be in trouble, but her children might be okay. If Finn was right, they were likely safe, but she didn't need to hear that right now. I made a promise. I will keep it. I tried to sound firm. She turned away from me in her sleep, wrapped tightly in her blanket. The next morning, she was very polite, possibly feeling less adventurous and more aware of the situation now. As I watched her get ready for the day, I thought about what we would need for the next 3 months. Food, more clothes, soap, shampoo, extra toothbrushes, and some personal items. We need to go shopping, groceries and some clothes. She glanced at me and said, "Can we get a hairbrush?" Her hair looked pretty good simply because she ran her fingers through it. It seemed to want to stay neat, just like she did. Of course. If you need anything else, we'll grab it. It might not be what I'm used to, but it'll do. She smiled a little. I don't need much makeup. Much was a funny word. I hadn't lived with a woman in a long time and had forgotten how much work it takes to look natural. It was easier to buy things than to make it awkward, and it seemed to make her happier. We ended up picking up some toiletries and essentials without drawing too much attention to ourselves. We spread out our shopping visits, stopping at a thrift store in another town and a grocery store nearby. At the thrift store, I found some cooking tools and silverware. Evie chose several new outfits, embracing a carefree style. Honestly, she seemed to be having more fun than I expected. She still seemed a bit confused about our situation. In public, she spoke in a softer version of her southern accent. She chose the name Libby for herself and called me Kay. Once we had put away her things and were back in our little camper, I had to ask, "Libby, I understand Kay, it's easy to remember, but why Libby?" It's short for Liberty Moonflower. When I was a teenager, I thought if I had been a hippie, that would have been my name. Liberty Moonflower just feels free. I would have worn tie-dye dresses and loved beads. She showed me her chunky rosewood bead necklace, one of the simpler ones from a friend's collection, and I would have had a pet called Spindrift. That seemed very thought out and serious. The last part sounded more like she was talking to herself. I glanced over at her. She was looking out the window, lost in her own thoughts. We all want something different from what we have. For some, it's money. For her, it was freedom. Freedom from her past and the responsibilities that came with it. I let her stay in her thoughts for a bit until she began to come back to reality. I pretended not to notice. "So, what exactly is a fur-person companion?" She smiled. "A dog, I think. Maybe a cat, but most likely a dog. I've never had one." The grocery store was an eye-opener. She didn't know how to cook at all. She had people to do that for her whole life. 30 years of living on my own made me a decent cook. In the Army, when you find yourself in a remote camp, people don't ask if you can fight. They assume you can. Instead, they want to know if you can whip up something more than just ramen noodles. She watched in surprise as I gathered all the basic ingredients for cooking. I thought she didn't even know what cooking oil was for, much less why someone might need both oil and shortening. As we moved around, we tried to keep a low profile. To fit in, we needed others to see us as something else. People in the campgrounds just saw a couple of former hippies taking a road trip. Evie kept her promise and acted like Libby whenever we were outside the camper. By the time we reached Florida's Panhandle, we had settled into a nice routine. I drove for 4 or 5 hours each day, stopping at campgrounds that accepted cash or sometimes using a Walmart parking lot if needed, choosing a quiet spot. I tried to be unpredictable with our routes. Humans aren't great at being random, but I did my best. Most days we cooked breakfast and dinner in the camper. I realized I was enjoying our lunch on the road, stopping at different local restaurants. Evie never picked a typical fast food place. Whenever it was her turn, she chose a special local spot, trying things like tall pies, unique meats, and fried treats. I wondered how we had ended up in this odd situation. It seemed strange to take turns picking food when someone was supposed to be in trouble, but it was just how things had worked out. She was really enjoying the different foods. At one stop in Louisiana, I decided to ask her about it. With a smile, she looked at her plate of alligator jambalaya. I grew up on fancy cooking. I just like to try food that's not the usual fast food. You don't seem to mind it. I learned to eat strange things during my jungle survival training. Trust me, living on bugs and other unusual foods helps you get over picky eating. She scrunched her nose playfully. I marveled at how she adjusted to this new way of life after her upbringing in Switzerland. She took a bite of sausage and chewed thoughtfully. Really, a lobster is just a big water bug that's made to look fancy. Good point. But that depends on who you ask. Very true. She grabbed another biscuit, spreading extra butter on it. I couldn't help but say, it's nice to see someone who enjoys their food. I need to slow down a bit. I used to exercise a lot before you picked me up. If I keep eating like this, I won't fit in my friend's clothes anymore. Honestly, she didn't look like she had to worry about that. Seriously, you don't need to stress about it. In a funny southern accent, she replied, while I do appreciate the compliment, kind sir, my expanding size begs to differ. I almost burst out laughing. Soon we were both laughing so hard we had tears in our eyes. It took over half an hour before we could look at each other without giggling again. She pulled out a map. I'm not sure how important this is, but if we stay on our current path, we'll be in California for 2 months. That was on my mind, too. I wasn't worried about Hawthorne. She had skipped a chance to cause trouble before. But I didn't want to be an easy target if anyone started searching for us. I was thinking about how to answer when she quietly added, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. There was a hint of longing in her voice. I sighed. You really are missing out, but it would certainly make the time pass. We should get some thick blankets at the next stop, and maybe some flannel pajamas. It can get pretty chilly there in winter. At the next stop, we not only got the blankets and pajamas, but somehow a small, battery-powered Christmas tree ended up on our little dining table. She seemed a bit dreamy after that. She had been really open about everything, but the Grand Canyon clearly meant something special to her. It felt like it represented something important that she maybe thought she had lost. She was quieter now, almost shy. For several days after that, we didn't talk about anything serious. We kept to light topics and fun trivia. Still, it felt more comfortable than I had expected. Then we stopped in central Illinois for a hamburger. The place was called Moonshine Diner. I'm not sure where we heard about it, but people said it had the best burgers. They were good, maybe not quite as good as the stories, but just finding the diner in the twisty country roads felt like a win. It was the perfect kind of relaxing detour for our 2 hippie road trip story. We needed to get there before 12:30, though. That's when the grill shuts down and you end up with cold sandwiches. So we decided to stay the night at a mostly empty campground to make sure we got to lunch on time the next day. Winter in central Illinois isn't ideal for camping. The wind is almost always blowing. There's nothing to break it. No hills or trees, just open fields as far as you can see. A few scattered trees divide the endless flat land. Even in a sturdy house, you can hear and feel the wind. In a 1970 RV camper, it's even more noticeable. We had already settled in for the night, as usual, facing away from each other under our blankets, with a wall of pillows between us. The camper shook as the wind picked up. I heard her move a little. I'm cold. The camper jolted from a stronger gust, and she started adjusting the pillows to block the draft on her side. The wind kept blowing, rocking the camper gently. The cold felt like it was creeping in. After a moment, she sat up. Ken, we're both adults, and you've been really kind about my needs. Maybe tonight we can just cuddle our blankets together and sleep back to back? I agreed, and we settled in with her back against mine. The next morning was a bit tricky. We woke up at the same time. At some point, we had shifted around, and I found myself lying on my back with my arm around her as she leaned into my side. I couldn't believe I had slept so deeply that I didn't notice us changing positions, but it seemed to have happened. We slowly and silently untangled ourselves. From the surprised look on her face, she seemed as surprised as I was. With a hint of humor, she said, I must be getting really attached. If it makes you feel better, I'm not planning anything extreme. She sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what I said. So, what is our plan? She asked. Our plan? A sense of being in this together, remember? I thought for a moment. I guess I can share. You're not the type to just sit around." She frowned a bit at that, but I kept going. "Most of your duties run themselves, but you also take part in important meetings and have a say in decisions, even when Reinhardt is there. If I'm right, Reinhardt can't vote on your behalf." I paused until she nodded slowly. "So if you don't attend those meetings, what happens? If you're unable to go, someone will likely fill in for you. But if news about your well-being comes out regularly, it will make things tricky. It will cause uncertainty in choices and slow down plans. This will affect Reinhardt's interests. In the long run, it could cost him enough to make him act. It's not like he'll come for you himself. He has people for that. They won't be coming for me, they'll come for you." Her eyes widened a little at that. She had begun to feel that we were allies, perhaps with a sense of friendship. I shook my head to stop her from responding. "He won't touch you. I'm choosing the battlefield, and unless we do something really unwise, he won't know there's a problem until it's too late." "So I'm bait?" There was a mix of disbelief and deep weariness in her voice. "Partly. Mostly at first, but now I'm starting to hope you might become a true ally. Maybe even a partner." She looked down quietly. "Are you going to face him?" "If everything goes well. But first, I want him to feel some of the pain he has caused others." She stood up quietly, gathered her things, and went to change in the small bathroom. By the time she came back, I had changed and poured 2 cups of coffee. She looked at me for a long moment. "If you want my help, I have conditions." "You still don't seem to understand the kidnap victim situation." She remained calm. This was a woman who had faced tough meetings many times, much stronger than I had expected when we first met. "I know ways to hit him where it counts that you haven't even thought of." I could appreciate that. "What do I get in return?" Her bright blue eyes were serious as she didn't answer my question. "Emma and her family. He'll go after them to get to me." "I want to keep them safe from him," she said. "Moving them could draw too much attention, but I can set up real protection and make a few calls. If Hawthorne cares about her like you say, she should help us. If not, I might have to use other means to convince her." She didn't ask for details, but gave me a curious look. "I have proof of her connection to a serious incident from the Macau event. One of my team recorded it. I'd rather not bring it up, though. Using information against someone important should always be a last option. Anyone in a high position knows how to handle difficult situations, and she didn't appear to hesitate during that event." She shook her head and picked up her coffee. "Maria told me you'd be persistent." We moved to the small table. "I'll take that as a compliment. Are you sure you can find people to protect them?" "I have a friend from my old team who runs a security company. He owes me a favor. I had sent Kurt work after his military career, so he would likely take on more. Katie would probably back this decision, too. She always thought practically." Evie played with the pattern on the table near the Christmas tree. "Eric isn't just focused on money, he's also proud. That pride is what makes him dangerous. That's why I'm here." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? I remember how we first met. And if I hadn't already wanted to talk to you or consider working together, Maria would have made sure I was safe." "Maybe they would have protected her. Maybe not. Michael said she was skilled enough to handle herself. But regardless, I wouldn't be here." "Why then?" I asked. "My family, especially my grandchildren, and Emma. Eric will come after them sooner or later, especially if anything happens to me." Emma stood up to him, something nobody else has dared to do. She told him to take his money and leave her alone. "He may be patient, but he never forgives. He will always hold a grudge." "And you've been protecting her." "I've been her only protection. Until now, I could only watch and wait for him to make a move. But being just a shield isn't enough." She looked at me with a sharp gaze, and I understood what she meant. "I need someone strong," she said. I stood up to refill our coffees, taking a moment to think. It all made sense now. I hadn't known about Emma's stand against him until Evie mentioned it. I had thought she might be sacrificing herself to keep her family safe from me. But to her, I was a lesser threat compared to the real danger she faced. Her past made her realize who the true threat was. I returned to the table with our coffees. "So, we're partners." She offered a slight smile and reached across the table to hold my hand gently. "Partners." We then set off to get our special burgers as we drove toward Dallas, where Kurt's company was located. We stopped quickly at a fast food place, which made Evie a bit unhappy. She knew we had to use the Wi-Fi, so she didn't say anything, at least not out loud. I just got us some coffee and waited for a reply to my dinner invitation. It didn't take long. While the response was somewhat positive, I sensed that Katie might have written it. There was a cold feeling in the email that seemed so different from Kurt. That evening, as we rested back to back, she spoke up. "Ken? Yeah? I didn't pick any of this. It's just how I was born." That makes sense. I wasn't like Emma. I didn't have the strength to fight back. Did you really want to? For a time, but it seemed too hard to even start. That sounds tough. Don't talk down to me. I didn't get to choose anything the one time I tried. Her voice trailed off. What happened? I was dating a guy named Nick. He seemed perfect until he suddenly disappeared. I thought my parents liked him. He was a lawyer from Yale and came from a wealthy family. We planned to hike the Grand Canyon, but he just didn't show up. That made things clearer. She sighed. My father talked to his father, and they decided it would be better for both families if we broke up. My family was approached by Eric's father about a match. It was like something from an old storybook. My father made it clear I had no choice. You could have left all of it behind. Leave everything? I would have lost it all. No one ever said it directly, but it was obvious. Money, privileges, reputation, just like I said. I'm not Emma. She has Eric's strength. I don't. I smiled to myself. That's different now. I suppose it is. But it's a bit late for that. So what happened to Nick? He found someone else and got married in 6 months. This was about 3 months before my family joined with House Reinhardt. I thought he would miss me for a long time. That really took away any hopes I had about love. She got quiet for a moment, then leaned against me a bit more. I wanted it to be like a story where two people who don't get along are brought together and fall for each other. It started off like that. There was no love between us at first, but it never changed. Sounds like you weren't right for each other. She laughed softly with a hint of sadness. He likes two kinds of women. The sweet ones he can control, and the rougher, experienced ones. They support everything he believes about women. That must have been hard for him to have a daughter. My way of standing up to him. My first act was not taking his family name. The second was deciding against having more children after I got sick. I can see how that would be a tough situation, but people often find ways through problems in relationships. The illness wasn't the biggest problem. He never promised to be loyal, and honestly, I didn't expect it. We lived our own lives. Our marriage was more about money, and I had agreed to have 2 kids. After getting sick, I decided not to have any more children. We had trouble conceiving, and I went through many tests. He never thought he might be the reason. I paid a high price just to see his medical reports. Emma was almost a miracle. Are you sure she's really his? That's a fair question. I wasn't perfect, but I was careful. Eric had her tested to be certain. Trust was hard to come by between us. Do you have any doubts about the Reinhardt family line? No, thankfully. I've kept a close watch on that. So we're at his third weakness. Money, pride, and now his legacy. How did you know? Really? Hundreds of years of Reinhardt merchants making a name for themselves, and he wants 2 kids? His frustration over Emma? I don't have to think hard about it. Legacy means a lot to people like him. If Emma has turned away from him, what can he do? I'm not sure. I know he's starting to rely on the board more for support. His family line matters to him, though he might have plans for Ellie. She spoke calmly and clearly, but underneath her fear was strong and ready to strike. She was scared. After that, it got quiet, and I felt her drift off to sleep behind me. She had shared her worries, making them easier to handle. But my own worries grew stronger. I had almost given Reinhardt exactly what he wanted. If I had hurt Evelyn, Emma, and Emma's husband, he would have been the one left to take care of the girls. They were just kids, and even with my threats, I doubted I could hurt them. Without their parents, they would have been open to his influence, allowing him to mold their feelings towards me. He could have had 3 of them to work with. Surely one would become what he wanted. I needed to rethink my plan. Long-term suffering couldn't be the answer. There were too many unknowns. He needed to feel hurt, loss, and despair, but he couldn't be allowed to stay. We never spoke about it, but the wall between us never went back up. As we traveled south from the cold, we continued to share one blanket. I never meant to actually go into Dallas. Dealing with traffic there wouldn't have been fun even at the best time. More importantly, cities are filled with cameras. Cameras at banks, in stores, on the streets. So I planned to meet Kurt at a steakhouse a few miles outside the city. As expected, Katie was with him. Kurt had told me she handled the business side of the firm. It felt clear that she didn't trust me at all. Not that I held it against her. She kept a calm look as the two made their way to the table. Kurt looked around the restaurant closely. He sat Katie across from Evie and then took his own seat. It was a bit old-fashioned for his age, but I had done the same for Evie, which was more common in our generation. "Colonel, I wasn't sure you would come." I nodded toward Katie. Katie offered a polite smile. "Business is business." "Very practical." Kurt smiled slightly. "How's Pogo?" "Married." Both Kurt and Katie looked surprised. Pogo, Sergeant Major Godek, had always been single. Katie blinked in shock. "Really? Which girl would?" Kurt gently placed his hand over hers. "Katie." She leaned back in her chair a little. She seemed to have some doubts about us over the past few years. Some of it was deserved, but Kurt was still the same. We had just gotten used to it for maybe too long. Evie watched their interaction with great interest. Katie continued, "So, who is the lucky girl?" "He met her while on leave about 15 years ago." Kurt shook his head. "I ran into him about 10 years ago and he never mentioned her." I shrugged. "It's a long story. They had many hurdles before they could be together." Katie smirked. Sounds like she was really in trouble. "Not really, but also not too far off." I wasn't sure how much I wanted to share. Luckily, a waiter showed up to take our orders, stopping any further talk. When we resumed, it was back to business. Katie's forced smile faded. "So, what can K2 Executive Services do for you?" Kurt took out a notepad. "We need a long-term security detail for a family." "How long-term? What kind of security?" "A year, maybe more. Full package, drivers, emergency alarms, and security help. The father can likely protect himself, and the mother will get help from the police. So primarily the home and 3 kids. We'll need to hire more people. I can start with a 3-person team right away, but we'll need to grow that to 6, and it will be costly." Evie leaned in, making eye contact with them. "There's no such thing as too expensive for this. Make it 12 if you need to. More if needed." Katie gave her a calming smile. She clearly had dealt with worried clients before. "A team of 6 is almost $800,000 a year, just for the basic costs and hours." Evie turned to me. "Did you bring your tablet?" I handed it to her after checking for the restaurant's Wi-Fi. "Do you have your cell number?" Katie shared the details. "You should get a call soon. But the banks are closed. For some things, banks never really close." Katie raised an eyebrow as the salads began to arrive. A few minutes later, her phone rang. She spoke softly for a bit, then checked something on her smartphone, her face becoming serious. "Who are you, and why should we not rethink everything right now?" "I'm just a very worried grandmother. I need my grandkids kept safe no matter what." "Why us? We're a small firm. There are bigger firms you could choose from. But Ken doesn't know them. He trusts you and says you can handle this." Katie seemed to be thinking hard about her choices, but kept looking at her phone, likely checking their business bank balance. I took out my notepad with a list I had put together on the way. I handed it to Kurt. "These are the former team members who might help. They owe me some favors." Kurt skimmed the list. Hollywood, Needles. He paused and looked up at me. "Are you sure about him? Did you notice that camper as you came in? Seriously?" He glanced at Evie's colorful shirt and smiled, realizing her playful style. Still quite the jokester. Katie leaned over to see the list. "That's a lot of favors. But with the money your friend just added to our account, we can make it worth their while." Then she looked at Evie. "You have a banker who could reach the president of our bank?" "No, I have a bank. I'm the only client." She paused. "Actually, I own 5 banks, but I trust this one the most." We explained Emma's situation and the plan we had without going into how I got involved. Katie seemed to notice that we were holding back, but the big money Evie had put into the account likely eased her concerns. "How do we contact you if we need to?" I can't get involved directly, so it's just information sharing. Use PGP. It's secure against most hacks. Give it to Wendy and Pogo for now. Then just Pogo. Kurt nodded while Katie looked a bit confused. Wendy? As in that Wendy? She's a travel agent now. She met an Australian pilot we worked with in Asia and decided to leave the military. They started a discreet travel business. Katie knew what that meant. It's funny how the wives always find out things no matter what. Really? We were all worried about her being around our guys, but she seemed so uninterested we thought she might not care. I looked at her. Katie, I know how you feel about me, but I made it clear to Wendy and the team that nothing inappropriate would happen on my watch. Ever. She glanced at Kurt. I never heard that. Would you have believed him? Or me? She shook her head. Probably not. The conversation drifted to a close after that. As we stood to leave, Katie smiled slightly at Evie. The money is good, but don't think I don't know we should also be recognized in that book. Those first years after starting the company were tough. Someone. She paused, glancing my way. Someone suggested we take on a few small, quick contracts that we could manage. They were legal and needed some careful handling, protection, and training. That helped us succeed and truly make something of ourselves. Kurt gave me a slightly guilty look. I didn't blame him. Katie had to have suspected something, and eventually, she would have figured out it was me. As we stepped outside, I noticed Katie looking at the camper with a mix of disbelief and amusement, whispering something to her husband. They seemed happy together. Good for them. Just because I didn't have my own happily ever after didn't mean they couldn't enjoy theirs. We reached the Grand Canyon almost 3 weeks later. We had explored a bit, but the canyon was a destination we had to see. It was a risk, something people in my line of work usually avoid. Katie had insisted we stop at the canyon, so I wondered if she had planned a meeting or check-in. If that was the case, she didn't have anything helpful to share. Kurt and Katie were legitimate if the FBI took an interest, and they were well prepared if it turned out to be someone else. If there was a plan involved, it was better to bring it up now. We arrived just before sunset on Christmas Eve. We stood on the edge alone, in the quiet, listening to the cold breeze, watching the sky change into amazing colors. I felt her hand reach over and gently take mine. You won't need any of those weapons. There's nobody here. I just wanted to see this. Softly, with a hint of yearning, I didn't reply. Honestly, I was lost in the colors and the darkening sky above. She moved a little closer, maybe seeking refuge from the wind. I let go of her hand and wrapped my arm around her to keep her warm. She leaned into me, and we watched until the stars filled the sky. That night, in the soft glow of our little tree, instead of turning away from me, she faced me. I'm tired of feeling lonely. Her words carried a deep longing, a clear need for connection. The moment felt important, filled with an energy that neither of us could ignore. But it felt easy, without any awkwardness. Two people who had come to understand each other, perhaps more than anyone else had in years. The next morning, instead of moving away, we simply stayed there. She was curled into my side, and I gently ran my fingers through her hair. She sighed softly. I might just stay like this all morning. I'm fine with that. It's chilly and there's no need to hurry. I felt her smile, but it seemed to fade a bit. Ken, I know this isn't typical. I'm about to ask for a lot. But can we just be us until we get to wherever we're headed? Just Kay and Libby exploring together? And enjoying our time together? Sleeping in and sharing treats at cafes. 1 bowl of ice cream, 2 spoons. I've never done that. This feels more real than my marriage. It took me by surprise. I had been in similar situations before, but this felt different, more genuine. It was unusual. Turning her down seemed unkind, and maybe I wanted this too. I ruffled her hair gently. I instinctively reached out and touched the top of her head. We can do that. She shuddered against me for a moment. I first thought she was cold, but then I sensed her feelings as she fought back tears. I really didn't know what to do. It had been so long, so I just held her quietly. I guess that was the right choice. Soon she looked up at me with a small smile and red eyes, sniffling a bit. I'm sorry, I'm just being, I don't know, a little silly. No, not silly. We're away from everything. All the things you've been caring for, everything you've been looking after, it's all handled by someone else now. You don't have to be strong right now." She lowered her head again and let out a long exhale. We rested like that for a few hours. At some point, Evie had found a way to bring a couple of bottles of wine into the camper. We spent Christmas Day together, mostly just enjoying each other's presence. The next few weeks were the best I had experienced in a long time. We wandered around almost randomly, stopping at unique little attractions. We visited lots of wineries. In many ways, it felt like before Christmas. But instead of pretending to be a couple, we were one. We held hands often, playfully teased each other, and shared every dessert, one dish, 2 spoons. Reality only interrupted when we stopped at different places to coordinate with Wendy. Our pajamas stayed tucked away for the entire time. Eventually, though, our vacation had to come to an end. On a remote road in Southern California, overlooking a dry landscape with strange patches of farmland, we met my travel agent. 2 SUVs, 7 men, and 1 woman, Wendy. I pulled off the road and parked. 4 of the men split away and began to approach the camper, revealing their weapons. They seemed like skilled professionals. I wasn't sure what type they were, though. Evie watched them carefully through the window. "So what do we do now?" I unloaded both handguns and placed them on the small table underneath the little Christmas tree. I thought no one could get to Wendy, but if they did, having a couple of guns wouldn't change things. "We need to move carefully," she said. We stepped outside with our hands slightly up. 2 of the men went into the camper while 2 kept watch over us. The rest looked out for any trouble. We just stood still and waited until they cleared the camper. The SUVs looked very strong and sturdy. They had been built up to handle rough conditions. Wendy got a sign from her team and motioned for us to come closer. Evie took my hand as we walked down the dusty road. Wendy had a strange smile as we got closer. "I usually don't plan family trips, Colonel, but for you, I'll make it happen." I looked at the Land Cruisers. Japanese vehicles, Russian gear. People aren't buying American anymore. The vehicles are so modified they probably have parts from many places. I got these cruisers for a good deal from old contacts. The government bought them first. Shipping costs were low since we were bringing back empty planes anyway. I turned to her security team. "Wendy, what's going on? This isn't subtle. You have a big team and your security seems too tense." Her smile disappeared. "Someone tried to disturb one of your people, but it didn't end well. Kurt sent me some information." Evie looked surprised. "Who?" "The husband. I don't know much else. Kurt assured me everyone is fine. He also sent a note for you." She handed me a sealed envelope as we got into one of the vehicles. It looked safe, but I figured Wendy had already read it. That was something I might have done too. Business is business. Evie was struggling to stay calm. Her hands were tight and her nails were pressing into her palms. "That person. We've only been out of touch for 3 months." I opened the envelope. It had reports from Kurt and a mysterious note just signed M. M. Very secret agent style. Definitely Maria. They tried to make it seem like an accident. They forced him off the road with another vehicle. Bad move. Evie managed a tight smile. He was in his pickup? Someone must have paid a lot for that. Her smile grew a little more. I could see a hint of pride in her eyes. Kurt said it was reinforced. That made it harder to push him off the road than they thought. What happened next? Kurt had a team following him, but they didn't need to act. When they tried to force him off, he didn't stop and crashed into a support beam. No one survived, but Maria's people tracked some money back to a part of Reinhardt IG. Emma's husband worked with Cumulus Green, the Army side of the Cumulus program. They might not be the same kind of fighters as my team, but they were known to be very skilled too. In the old saying, they thought that having doubts was a luxury. Wendy was trying not to smile. She clearly recognized who Maria was. She couldn't help it. What a situation. When we're working with certain people, it usually means trouble. She tried to sound calm, but it was hard. The thought of being in a messy situation still thrilled her, even if it wasn't good for business. Your job is to get us to Fiji quietly, but Maria might ask questions, so try not to carry anything suspicious for now. Most of the people we're worried about are already gone. The rest can't travel. I keep watch, and we haven't moved anything illegal lately, just some items from the black market. Do you need any of that? She looked at Evie with a raised eyebrow. I'll consider it part of the ticket price. Evie met her gaze without a smile. I don't think so. We've been getting by with just the basics and an unusual agreement. You both have quite the story, then? It's a long one. Well, I'm glad to hear you're getting along. You'll be sharing a shipping container for about 40 hours. Evie looked a bit unsure. A shipping container? It's pretty nice. Well-lit, cozy, and comes with a private bathroom. The whole setup. Evie shot me a look that hinted the next 40 hours would be interesting. Actually, the shipping container was quite comfortable and even had a small wine cooler with 16 bottles of good wine. We drove under the sign that said, "Welcome to Fiji." Once we arrived in Fiji, we moved from the shipping area to the passenger area for customs. The goal was not to sneak past customs, but to avoid using our real names and to dodge security cameras that could recognize us. Wendy's passports worked perfectly, thanks to her contacts more than any mistakes on the part of the Fijian Customs and Immigration Department. Mr. Ellis Banks and Mrs. Candace Tauhi had both passed away less than 3 months earlier. Whoever Wendy knew had cleverly put off the death notices for a short while, just long enough for Evie and me to get through Fiji, with the wait explained as regular paperwork. Evie adjusted her backpack happily as we left customs. So, Ellis, what's the plan now? We need to catch a bus. It's a 4-hour ride to Suva. A bus? Like an actual one? Air-conditioned and everything? Really? I thought after our adventure in the shipping container we'd be going in something much less nice. A playful spark lit her eye. Not that I'm complaining about the shipping container. It was a very unique experience, never a boring moment. The express bus was right on time and only about half full. We shared a bench, and she leaned against me as we traveled. Evie's earlier worry seemed to fade during our trip to Fiji, but I could still feel her frustration with Reinhardt. She even enjoyed a quick stop at the Sigatoka market, buying a big basket of fresh fruit and a paper bag of samosas. She had been to Fiji before, but instead of exploring the area, she had stayed at fancy resorts. Now she watched the small villages and coastline pass by with real interest, nibbling on a samosa and offering one to me. I really like these. It's cool to find them here, she said. I took one. They make great samosas here. The Indian workers who came to grow sugarcane brought some of their food with them. I must have missed that in history class, she replied. I thought for a moment. I don't mean to be rude, but I doubt your schools talked much about that part of history. She gave me a little frown and moved to the other side of our seat, but didn't say anything for a bit. Then she said, I'm not cold-hearted, Ken. Her voice was strong, but a little shaky. I felt uneasy. She had been trying hard, really hard, to act normal, and mostly managing it. I know you aren't. I'm not upset with you, Evie, and honestly, schools don't focus on it much either. We finished the samosas in silence. The seller had given her 3 less, but we were still full. By the time we reached Suva, she had leaned gently against me again, as if pulled by something unseen. After we grabbed our backpacks and the basket of fruit, I began to lead her toward the harbor. It was a bit of a walk, but I preferred it to getting a cab driver to remember us. The early afternoon sun cast shadows that felt a little off from our movements. We had only walked a short distance when a quiet voice came from behind us. It was a woman's voice, worn and heavy, as if she had seen too much of a harsh world. You're clear. The voice was so soft that Evie didn't react right away. I reached over and took her hand. Keep looking ahead and keep walking, Evie, I said softly. How long have you been following us? Since you came through customs, and thanks for the samosas, I was really hungry. It hit me then. Pogo had been right. Spooky was very good at this. Evie didn't look back. So, are you our protector? A quiet, dry laugh came from behind. Howard doesn't know many protectors, Princess. Only one I know of, and I'm not her. There was a hint of mockery in the word princess. Spooky didn't have a high opinion of wealthy people. She had spent most of her life in foster care and had faced many hard times. Her words, not mine. Like I said, some things leave a mark. Evie chose to stay quiet, perhaps understanding how complicated things were. That was a smart choice. Spooky had spent 14 years working for a hidden part of the Cumulus program. They brought in people from tough backgrounds, those often ignored by society, doing jobs that most wouldn't want to take on. Spooky had not just survived, she'd done really well. Where to, Spooky? Royal Suva Yacht Club. Greece has the Sea Angel docked there. Evie smiled slightly. Needles? Spooky? Greece? Don't any of your friends have regular names? Before I could answer, Spooky jumped in, her tone sharp. Spooky is my real name, princess. That was true. I'd signed as a witness on her marriage license. Spooky no last name had turned into Spooky Godek. Spooky was the name Pogo had given her, and she believed it was the only name that truly mattered. The local authorities didn't care what she was called as long as the fees were paid. She had many passports under different names, but none meant as much to her as Spooky. I understood how meaningful that name was to her. I'd given her away at her wedding and had tried to take care of her over the past couple of years. Evie seemed uneasy, so I quickly shifted the topic. Evie, it's a tradition where I come from, and it's important where we're headed since this place used to be a smuggling hub. Plus, it's safer. Can you imagine how little what you've learned really matters? She walked quietly for a moment, holding my hand tightly. I guess all anyone could really show is that I hired a small security firm to protect my grandchildren. Exactly. We walked on in silence for a bit until Spooky appeared next to Evie. Just go to the 5th slip. Grease is there. Nobody will be watching the boat. Evie looked thoughtfully at the slip, likely realizing our options were limited if something went wrong. How do you know? Spooky pointed towards a nearby shop where many people were browsing. Angel and Danny are shopping. That would certainly draw attention. Spooky stepped back as we quietly boarded the boat and went below to the lounge, giving a quick nod to Grease, who barely looked up. He was focused on something inside an access panel with a flashlight. We settled onto a couch together. Evie looked around. A Viking? I'm no expert, but I think Grease mentioned she's a 68. She gently touched the teak paneling. Very nice. It's a charter fishing boat for upscale folks. Not quite your crowd, but they wish they were. She seemed ready to speak, but then a slender, attractive woman in a floral dress walked in. She had just become a mother, but like her father, she stayed active and looked fit. She smiled at me. Uncle Howard, did you enjoy your trip? It was more useful than I thought. I can see that. You know, most people collect things like shot glasses or cute little spoons as souvenirs, not people. Danny always had a clever remark ready. Danny, this is Evelyn. Evelyn, this is Danny. Danny gave Evie a polite nod and a small smile before looking back at me. I thought you were going to hurt her. Evie seemed surprised by the comment. Plans can change, Danny. Not everything is as it seems. She's a friend, not a prisoner. She shrugged. I guess we can handle her later. Handle who? A smooth voice with a light Russian accent came from the doorway. I didn't need to turn around. From Evie's wide eyes and Danny's cheeky grin, I knew it was Angel. Danny pointed to Evie. This is Evelyn. Still here? I looked at Angel and counted to myself for a moment. Even though I had seen her many times before, no one could resist her charm. With her golden hair, bright blue eyes, and friendly smile, she was hard to ignore. I realized I had never seen her exercise, except when she playfully chased her daughters at the beach. Evie spoke up. You must be the Angel the upset girl was talking about. Angel simply smiled. Evie turned to me. How many people knew you were planning on? I remembered the awkward chats I had with my friends, my family, before I left. They didn't question my motives, just expressed worry about how it would affect the authorities. 9. Doesn't seem like you kept it a secret. Do they look like the talkative type to you? She glanced at Danny and Angel with a skeptical look. Not really. I needed their help, and if something had gone wrong, I wanted them to understand the possible outcomes. Danny settled into the chair across from us. Things go both ways. If anything happened to Howard, we would have come looking for answers. Sometimes her tone reminded me too much of her mother, but she was definitely a daddy's girl. Of Monster's 3 kids, she resembled him the most, determined and practical when it mattered. I waved Angel over. Evelyn, Evie, has agreed to help me. She has her own reasons for wanting to face Reinhardt. So she can take all his resources too? Spooky had come in unnoticed and was behind the counter, preparing some fruit Evie and I had bought. She sounded doubtful. I noticed Evie struggling between her pride and what was sensible. Soon enough, her pride would win out. She wasn't used to being talked to like this, and I feared things might become tense because of Spooky's comment. At least this time, Evie stood her ground. For my daughter and my grandkids, They can do whatever with their money. It doesn't matter to me. Spooky seemed unsure, but I could tell that the thought of Evie wanting to protect her family surprised her. Evie had just become a mother a few months before I left, and the weight of that role clearly affected her. I could see Evie thinking about her new life and responsibilities. Evie noticed Spooky's uncertainty. I'm just a grandmother trying to do what's right. Spooky frowned at her but looked a bit more at ease. We already have one interesting character on board anyway. Danny smiled wider when her dad was mentioned, while Angel ignored the conversation, busying herself with beach towels and sunscreen from one of the lockers. The engine below us rumbled to life. We could barely hear it, but it was enough to signal a change. Angel grinned. Time for us to create some distractions. Danny smirked. We'll relax on the deck as we leave the harbor. They'll remember the boat, but maybe not us. She glanced at Spooky, who cut off the question she was about to ask. I don't think so. With you two up there, they wouldn't even notice me. Spooky took her plate of fruit. I'll see if Grease needs help with the radio or something. I watched them head out. Angel seemed excited about making a memorable moment as she walked to the deck. Grease was indeed lucky to have such friends. Evie watched them until they were gone. What's Spooky's issue with me? Is she against everything? Not really. She's not political and probably hasn't heard of big thinkers. She just doesn't like wealthy folks. Evie looked around the yacht. Really? She looks pretty at home here. Grease and Angel are her friends, and they didn't always have money. Plus, this boat is part of their fishing business, not just a status symbol. I wasn't ready to share how Grease and Angel got their money, especially since the official report only mentioned that her last partner had drowned during a fishing trip and didn't say anything about the 4 others who went missing. The documents were all formal, with signatures from some well-known local business people and the chief of police. She's also protective of those she cares about. Which includes you, right? Yeah, I guess I'm a kind of father figure to her. And I think of her as my daughter. Spooky had once told me that I was the only father she really knew. For a moment, Evie showed a hint of understanding and sadness, but it quickly faded. That makes sense. Partly, I guess. Just remember the effects of growing up without a stable family. She looked down at her feet. It's strange, really. Sometimes I think Emma might have preferred to be alone. The way I treated her made me wonder if I hurt her just as much as. She looked up and paused, glancing at the doorway where Spooky stood, quiet and hard to read. As soon as our eyes met, she slipped away and vanished. I turned to Evie. I need to talk to her. Evie nodded quickly, her eyes wide. I found Spooky in a corner. There aren't many places to hide on a big yacht. She looked at me in surprise. I was ready to explain myself about Evie, but I didn't expect the tremor in her voice or the uncertain look on her face. Your daughter? I did give you away at the wedding, didn't I? But you did that for Pogo. Her voice was sincere and unsure, which was not like Spooky. How many people have you told why you love grilling at beach party Fridays? I couldn't have been that drunk. I laughed and waved my hand playfully. She blushed deeply. That was a first. She had been visiting Pogo for almost a year when it happened. She thought they would have fun together until the attraction wore off. She believed Pogo felt the same. Then one night, under the stars, she found herself at the grill. As Pogo walked by, he playfully acknowledged her cooking. She gave him a look, and he grinned back. Can't walk by my girl cooking without saying thanks. That moment changed everything. She realized their bond was stronger than they had thought. The next year was filled with unspoken feelings as she tried to show how she really felt. Each grilling session was a chance to express her affection. Then a surprise changed everything. She reached out and gently touched my fingers with hers. For her, that was as close as she could get to a full hug, full of unspoken emotions. So, am I getting a new stepmom? She said with a touch of humor. We are just friends. But you're involved, right? Very ladylike, Spooky. She smiled, a cheeky grin. You really are. Seriously, you're with someone who started a big problem in Africa over oil, causing so much trouble. You win the award for bravest talk since the thing with Josephine. Charles, whatever his name is. Hippolyte Charles. I paused. And how did you... Pogo only has military history books everywhere in the house. She tried to look annoyed, but couldn't hide her pride in surprising me. She shifted uncomfortably and ran a hand through her hair. This is going to get tricky, isn't it? For him. She gazed over the water. I think Donna might know a little about what's happening. It wasn't me. Probably Maria Hawthorne. The Triple B? I waited for her to explain. The badass boss of the bureau, the deputy director. She's supposed to be tough. I'm a target for her. I must have messed up somewhere. Everyone makes mistakes, but if she's aware of it, why are you able to walk around? I think there's a reason she cares. She seems to look out for Evelyn's daughter, Emma. Spooky raised an eyebrow. Not in any strange way. Evelyn wasn't the best mom, and Emma didn't care for her much. It seems like Maria has stepped in to help. Looks like we're all a bunch of misfits, huh? With our errors and problems? Doesn't anyone just fit in anymore? She smiled slightly, but then shook her head with a smirk. Maybe I should get her a Mother's Day card. She'd fit right in. By the time we returned to the salon, the sun was setting, and gentle sounds came from the enclosed bridge. Angel must have slipped in there after we cleared the harbor. Her things were scattered on the deck by the helm door, and Spooky placed them on the latch without saying a word. Evie was deep in conversation with Danny when we walked in. She paused and looked at us with caution. Spooky took a deep breath. So, what's the plan? Evie clenched her jaw. Her frustration about the Reinhardt was clear. Money, pride, legacy. By the time we reached the islands, the plan was starting to take shape. Grease and Angel's two oldest girls came racing down the dock, full of energy, while their youngest sat on the shoulders of a man. He jogged after Kisa and Lily, moving with ease as the little one held onto his hair, laughing happily. His sharp eyes scanned us as we approached. He seemed to notice Spooky a bit less now that she had a baby. His gaze lingered on Evie, sizing her up. As he took in the scene, I wondered if he even recognized his own daughter. Danny moved slightly ahead. She wanted to catch her father's eye and also saw X with her own little boy. They had stopped to look at something on the beach. Spooky stayed back with me, doing this often after our talk. She knew her little boy would be with Pogo at the shack. Monster smiled and greeted us cheerfully, a friendly word with little meaning for him beyond looking sociable. X approached him, giving Danny her boy while looking at Evie. Still here? Evie rolled her eyes dramatically. I'm not sure what's more unsettling, that everyone keeps asking that or that I'm starting to get used to it. X smiled, her expression not as impactful as Monster's. Sometimes I wondered if she had her own struggles. X shrugged. We can always have a late-night chat later. Evie's glance moved from X to Danny and back. Your daughter is just like you. Well, she has a bit of both of us in her. I used one of Grease and Angel's golf carts to bring Evie back to my house. She looked at the small beach house. It kind of reminds me of the camper. It's cozy and has one bed. She smiled as she set her backpack down by the bed. What will they do with our camper and your things? She asked, sounding a bit nostalgic. Wendy will store the camper in case we need it again, and my stuff will arrive soon enough. I had more stored here anyway. I quickly checked the house because the tropical weather can wear on buildings, especially when you least expect it. Dinner was close, and Grease's other two boats had been out. Pogo might like some help with the beach party. We could hear music before we even reached the shack. We met Pogo on the beach. This must be Evie, he said, smiling at her. Evie sighed. Yep, I'm here. And yes, you can always talk to me later. Pogo grinned. Of course. I shook my head. She's helping us out, trying to protect her child and grandkids from her husband. Spooks said you had a plan. Right before she took over the grill, we didn't get to talk about it. We'll start working on it tomorrow. He looked at Evie. I need to get back to managing the party. Nice to meet you, and if we need to chat, I'll keep it short, I promise. Evie tilted her head politely. Thank you. I appreciate that. With the party in full swing, I figured it would be easier to grab a table in the shack since the bonfires and grill were quite a way off. But as soon as we walked in, Danny and X jumped in to include Evie in their conversation. It seemed that tie-dye shirts, love beads, and jeans were not considered proper for the Friday beach party. I shrugged and stepped out to the grill to get a few plates of snacks while I waited for her to come back. I hoped Danny wouldn't get upset. While I was loading the plates, I noticed Spooky flinch when Pogo walked by. She shot him a glare, then caught my eye with a mischievous look before going back to grill the steaks. Evie came back wearing a silver sarong and carrying a couple of bags. Apparently, I was in the wrong outfit. Sarongs are required on Fridays. On other days, shorts and t-shirts are okay, but sarongs are still better. Oddly, while tie-dye is not allowed, batik is fine and even encouraged. You could have told me what to wear, you know. I didn't know it mattered for people caught up in all this. I wonder if there's a dress code for those in such situations. That would really help. I think it would be tough to follow those rules while being stuck here. Evie looked up at me. It is, Spooky's voice came from behind. I turned to her as she rested her hand on my shoulder. You're not the first to deal with hard times like this. I had a tough situation for 12 years before I could face it, and the plans were not easy. So you went through challenges too? The real struggle is hard, but what you learn later can bring surprising moments. It can. They seemed to share an understanding that I didn't quite get, but I was okay with that. I knew it was something I might not fully grasp, even if they explained it. As we walked back to the house, Evie nudged against me. I heard you shouldn't wear anything under the sarong. The next afternoon, we held our meeting. Evie laid out the plan. Pogo leaned back and looked at the ceiling, watching the fans spin slowly. You need to call Kurt. You're about to annoy this guy. Get more safety for the kids. Kurt's good, but get him all the help you can. Monster's head turned as he watched the kids playing in the sand. He glanced at me but didn't say anything. X was watching him from the side, as she always did. She moved slightly. What are the chances he can find us here? I thought for a moment. Low. It's not impossible, but it's quite low. Kurt, Needles, and the others have no clue where we are. Only Wendy knows how to connect us to Fiji. I'll tell her to boost security. Evie asked, Can I safely get online? I can send more money to Katie. Pogo nodded. I have a couple of ways to do it. It'll trace back to Europe. I have a satellite phone that can help hide the location, too. Have her call it. Pogo set up the connection, and within half an hour the phone he handed me rang. Katie answered. Talk to me. We just got enough money to hire a lot of help. I explained in detail what we needed, so we must be ready for a serious effort in Northern Virginia. How long will that last? This won't go on forever. 6 months. Either it will work or it won't. Our actions were careful at first. The news in the European papers had been pretty calm since we'd gone missing, just in case Evelyn had gone on some unexpected trip, which could be expected from someone of her status. It wouldn't do to misrepresent Evelyn Cabot too much. That just wasn't acceptable. Now, however, various boards of directors were starting to get worried. Part of their marriage had involved a big exchange of shares. Evelyn's proxy votes had time limits, a trick she used to protect herself from the Reinhardt. As time began to run out, many shares were going unvoted. Uncertainty filled the air. Markets and banks do not like uncertainty. The Reinhardt tried to collect his votes, but the legal troubles were nearly too complex to understand. Over the past few years, Evelyn had worked hard to shield her daughter and grandchildren from his influence. She created a series of legal barriers to protect them from him. To make things even more complicated, she reached out to her banker, sending over forms and instructions that led to more confusion. The financial tricks her husband had often used to gain money didn't work without her help or agreement. The Reinhardt was very upset, losing a lot of money in shares. He sent increasingly frantic messages to her banker to pass along to her. Those messages started tense and quickly turned into frustration. The Reinhardt would never find himself in real financial trouble. There was no chance he could lose enough money to change his way of life. But money was how he measured success, how he felt superior to those around him. It became clear to me that Evelyn had been planning her strategy for some time. Even with their finances being complicated, she was losing resources much more slowly than he was, and most importantly, shares were important for voting. Evelyn was carefully monitoring one specific company above all else. This was the one that would hurt him more than anything else. After 6 weeks of careful actions, I noticed she was becoming anxious for her chance to act, but it was getting close. We sat sipping coffee, watching the sun rise over the waves. Ken, we need to distract him, she said. Spooky is pretty good with a camera. Evelyn nodded with resolve, so we gathered what we needed. A beach chair, the ocean, a camera. The picture was clearly taken from a distance, possibly from a tree. It showed a woman laughing. She seemed happy in a man's company. A paparazzo sold this picture and a story to a minor European gossip magazine, affecting the privacy of those involved. If the Reinhardt had known sooner, if the magazine had realized how serious it was. In the end, the magazine wouldn't survive the fallout, but that wasn't a major loss. The Reinhardt faced public attention. The rumor suggested that his wife was seeking comfort from another. His messages through her banker stopped completely as he tried to manage the damage to his image. Photos of him with younger, attractive friends started appearing in various social news columns, but the rumors couldn't be stopped, even though many newspapers were struggling. In his frustration, he forgot that the key to magic is to keep people's attention somewhere else. The audience focuses on the distraction when they should be observing carefully. We had to take an Air Wendy flight to Germany. Another interesting trip. Spooky, Danny, and Monster had already been there for a week. We arrived at the old meeting room just as the discussion began. I followed her, acting like a typical bank worker. Evelyn Cabot walked into the dark wooden room confidently. Gentlemen, according to Article 7, Section 3, we need a confidence vote due to special circumstances. A 15% drop in value over the past 6 weeks qualifies. The director seemed surprised by her request. That would be very unusual. Yes, it is, but it is allowed. Not all board members are here. That's not an issue. We have enough members present. In the end, the vote turned out just as Evelyn wanted. She had the acting votes for 3 of the 4 absent board members. One of them was in a rush, clearly worried about being linked to an important event. The other 2 had less serious but still important reasons for giving Evelyn their votes. The last board member had always supported the Reinhardt. He had a concerning reputation because of serious claims against him. He seemed unconcerned and continued his usual routine. That wouldn't last. Danny's strong instincts led to serious consequences for him. He had just turned 48 when Danny and her father took him from his high-rise apartment, but he passed away later that day. Monster probably thought it was pointless to confront someone who had no answers and would be let go anyway, but he always supported his little girl. The company wasn't the biggest in the Reinhardt group or the most profitable. In fact, it barely made any significant profits compared to what he was used to. But the loss would be felt more than any other company. For the first time in almost 400 years since its founding during the 30 Years' War, the head of Reinhardt Pulverhof was not a Reinhardt. The small firm, which originally supplied materials to mercenary armies across Europe, still produced special military and industrial explosives. But what truly mattered was the complex rules that aimed to keep control within the Reinhardt family. The CEO of Reinhardt Pulverhof was also the director of the much larger transnational group known as Reinhardt IG. Now, Evelyn Cabot was the CEO of Reinhardt Pulverhof and the director of Reinhardt IG. Suddenly, the radio in my ear buzzed to life without warning. Control, this is Alpha. Tango, 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 Sector 3, over. Alpha, this is Control, go ahead, over. 8 targets in Sector 3, standard 2x2 formation heading toward Point Blue, over. Roger, Alpha, I can see them. Break. Break. All kilo elements. All kilo elements. Stand by for contact. Over. There was a long pause as I watched the figures moving toward the stables. They seemed skilled, but not as well as our team. They were too close to the stable walls, which was a mistake. They likely planned to gather there for their next move, probably bringing more people around from the other side. Before I could give a warning, another voice came through, older and more commanding. All kilo elements. This is Sandman. 4 people moving to Point Green, over. Sandman, this is Control. Copy that. Do you need assistance? Over. Negative kilo Control, easy target, over. There was a hint of dark humor in his voice, especially when he said kilo, showing he wasn't part of our team. Working together can be tough sometimes. The whole situation lasted just under a minute. Our team performed perfectly. We were ready for close contact if needed, but it didn't come to that. Katie would be pleased. Even though she always acted brave, I knew she worried about me, but I wasn't in the middle of it. I was observing everything through the video feed from the basement. My weapon was nearby, but realistically, the chances of them getting past us were almost non-existent. Sandman handled the 4 targets with cool efficiency. Hollywood took down 2 before they even realized they were in danger. The rest of their team tried to escape, but we had already shut that option down. All units checked in. No survivors. They had planned to harm a family for a lot of money, so I didn't feel sorry for them. As the gamblers say, you take your chances. Outside the immediate area, the only sound anyone might have heard was the 6 shots from the snipers. The local sheriff might think a couple of kids were playing with fireworks. While the observation post stayed in place, the rest of our team loaded the bodies into 2 waiting delivery vans. Needles had a car crusher that would be useful. Ironically, while the husband and wife were in the house heavily armed, the children had left days earlier. An armored van had come for them, at their grandmother's insistence, our client. The driver introduced himself as Patrick and his partner as Finn, but I could see the resemblance to their father. They had the same confidence and awareness. I didn't know where they were taking the kids, but anyone who messed with those 2 would regret it. Probably just for a little while. Then the Sandman walked in, Michael Sanders. He was Maria Hawthorne's partner. Formerly, he was supposedly on vacation in Florida looking for alligators. At least that's what I had heard. They had warned us about the team coming after us. From the way they talked, it seemed like they had crossed some lines to find out about it. I handed him a cleaned-up version of the video. No sound and no faces. He would take it back to Maria along with any clues from the bodies to help identify the team. I thought there wouldn't be much to find. They were probably from Russia or Eastern Europe. Many skilled people were coming from military units in those places, but that really wasn't my concern. I used the coded phone. Katie? Yes, it's done. 12 in total. Love you too. There were no curtains on the windows of the mountain lodge, just tinted glass. Expensive, but that was what I expected from my target. Even with the tint, my gear let me see him clearly. He sat at his old desk, not even glancing at the big window with the great view of the snow-covered mountains. He kept shifting in his chair, frustrated, unable to accept what had happened. Even from a distance, I could feel his anger about losing his money, pride, and reputation. I sensed his desperation and disgust at what was happening. I waited as he picked up the important folder. He opened it, looking puzzled at 2 photos. The photos began to fade slowly as light hit them. Soon, they would be unseeable. Suddenly, I felt a jolt and let the surprise sweep through me. It caught me off guard. Good surprises often do. 1,000 meters. Not a record, but close enough to be accurate. He was still focused on the pictures when the round broke through the barrier, hitting its mark. I saw him slump in the chair, his mouth opening and closing for a moment before I slung my rifle over my shoulder and started the long walk back to where I'd left the car. Somewhere in my mind, I could hear Gabby's laughter, distant but clear and lovely. Somewhere, Tricia smiled. Pogo brought over a bottle of rum and took a seat next to me. Donna looked at the bottle with a small, knowing smile. Maria didn't seem as excited, but she was too polite to refuse. Mike was looking up at the sign above the bar, chuckling and shaking his head. Maria asked him, "What's so funny?" Mike smiled. "They just put it up over the bar." "Put what up?" "The name of the unit." I had a feeling I knew what he meant, even if I wasn't sure how Mike knew too. He went on. "When they worked with you, they called it 16th Training and Readiness Group. They've had different names over time, but they actually started as the 5th Hunter-Killer Detachment back in Vietnam." Maria looked confused, while Donna seemed curious. I sighed. "It's a tradition for the unit. In 1972, the sign for the 5th Hunter-Killer Detachment was damaged in an attack. The unit clerk, a guy named..." I paused to think. Pogo jumped in. "Bugs! His name was Bugs." "Right, Bugs. He was quite the character. He painted a new sign, totally against the rules with those funky letters they used back then. So instead of 5, it looked like S, making it seem like SJK. Mike laughed. "I heard that from Horge at the academy. He spent time in your world. You know how CIA agents call it the company? Well, these folks always call their base." "The shack," I completed. Donna looked at the sign. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was surprised at how they broke security rules. "Hey, we're retired," I added. She turned to me. "I hope not entirely." I shrugged. "No need to promise anything." Maria looked at Mike. "Someone has to deal with these issues. Sometimes we can't use the regular methods. Maybe it was time to remove that video of Maria's actions against the official." Pogo gave me a look. I scanned the bar at the unusual but close group we'd gathered over the years. All kinds of mistakes, complicated folks, and weary hearts. Spooky's words rang in my mind. Maybe we could make a difference. It was 6 months until Evie came back. I was relaxing in a beach chair, enjoying the light sea breeze and watching the seagulls fly around when she arrived, in a beautiful sarong. She sat on my lap with a soft, happy sigh. "I'm tired of being alone, Ken. How long are you visiting?" 3 months. "Better than nothing," I gave her a gentle pat. "I was hoping you would come to the farm with me for 3 months, then back here for 3 and keep switching. Emma's family might visit us sometimes." That surprised me. "So, what about your job?" "It's on hold for now. I did a check and found some problems. I stepped back and made some calls. There are investigators from 6 countries looking into it." She smiled. "It will take years to sort out, and the organization will change for good." "What happens next? How does Emma feel about this?" She sighed again. "I'm not sure, but hopefully I have time to figure it out. She doesn't seem upset with me anymore." That's a start. She leaned back into me a bit more, and we were quiet for a moment. "Maybe we can take the camper out and go on another trip. I've got a guide for Yosemite. Are Ken and Libby going on another trip? Maybe 2 or 3. I have some duties to take care of here from time to time. Maria mentioned that." We watched the bright colors of red and orange fill the sky as the sun went down. Eventually, we got up from our chairs as the colors faded and headed to the shack. "Ken, I have a serious question." "Yes?" "I did some checking on you after Maria warned me. You seem to have a comfortable retirement as a colonel with good investments and a nice portfolio. But the travel, the things you've done." "You want to know where the money came from?" She nodded. "We took down a big player in illegal activities, and I found a bank account number and password with his things. No one else noticed it. It's not the kind of money you're used to, but it's important." "That makes sense. I remember you used to work in finance." She stopped me at the door. "One more thing." "What is it?" "When I came in earlier, I really think Spooky called me Mom." Hey, listeners! If you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales.